The story began as a massive horde of demons stormed a castle, making it seem as though the fortress had reached its end. But in the next moment, the invading demons were scattered throughout the castle by the overwhelming attacks of a single powerful man. He faced the demons alone, destroying them one after another without hesitation. After clearing those in front of him, he leaped into the air and fixed his gaze on a gigantic demon. With nothing but his bare hand, he crushed the monster and brought it down. The soldiers immediately recognized the man as the hero. As they watched him continue eliminating every remaining demon in his path, they kept calling out for the hero with growing excitement. Their voices suddenly gave way to the sharp bark of a dog, and the scene disappeared as the man opened his eyes on a bench in the middle of the city. His name was Sasuke, 18 years old and unemployed. Once again, he had dreamed about those days. 5 years earlier, during August of his first year in junior high school, he had suddenly been transported to another world. It all began on the birthday of a girl from his neighborhood, whose party he had been invited to attend. His childhood friends were also there, making it a familiar gathering after so many years. The birthday girl welcomed him warmly when he arrived. She was honestly very charming, and her beauty was impossible to ignore. Believing it was the perfect opportunity to confess his feelings, So-kun gave her a necklace as a present. She found it beautiful and wondered if it had been expensive, but he assured her there was no need to worry. He had earned it simply by giving his father extra shoulder massages and helping his grandmother more than usual. He remembered how his grandfather's shoulders felt as hard as steel, leaving him convinced that his own shoulders were about to give out. His grandmother had laughed the entire time and wished it could always be like that. The birthday girl laughed as well, put on the necklace, thanked him, and admired how devoted he always was to his family. Since So-kun truly liked her, he decided that this was the moment to tell her how he felt. Gathering his courage, So-kun dropped to one knee and confessed his feelings as loudly as he could. The moment the words left his mouth, he immediately wanted to hit himself. The girl gently apologized because she could not return his feelings. Looking back on it now, So-kun realized it had been a completely impulsive confession. His childhood friend was beautiful, talented in both academics and sports, and naturally very popular with boys. In contrast, he felt that he had nothing to offer. The moment he was rejected, he turned around and ran away. If anything described him, it was that he was simply an ordinary student with little to stand out. The girl tried to stop him by calling after him, but he literally jumped over the fence and kept running. That day, So-kun completely lost control. Overwhelmed by emotion, he cried as he ran through the streets, suddenly started breakdancing in the middle of a railway crossing, then made his way to the ocean, where he stripped completely naked and swam. Before he even realized what had happened, he somehow became lost in another world. Still completely naked, with only his bare backside exposed, he found himself standing before a girl wearing a cape. She had apparently been waiting for him and wanted him to become the hero who would save that world. Even then, So-kun remained completely flustered, unable to think about anything except the fact that he was standing there with his but completely naked. Suzuki immediately ran away, and the girl informed her companions that the summoned hero was escaping completely naked. As he continued running, he desperately demanded to know where he was and who all of them were. One of them explained that the place was called Degrifia and declared that he had been summoned as their hero. They tried to stop him because they wanted him to defeat the Demon King, but Suzuki refused and kept running. They insisted that his summoning was the key to saving their world and that he had been chosen for that purpose. So-kun could not understand any of it and angrily wondered why it had to be him, believing they could have summoned someone else instead. The girl in the cape caught up to him and pleaded for him to become the hero who would save their world. Instead, Suzuki begged to be sent back home. He was still only a middle school student, and until just moments earlier, he had simply been enjoying his ordinary youth. Before he could continue, the woman interrupted him with a single question. So-kun suddenly froze, dropped to the ground, and remembered the rejection he had just experienced. The painful memory returned all at once, and he quietly accepted that reality. The people around him celebrated the birth of their hero. Many believed that time would eventually heal every wound, but at that moment, Suzuki was still overwhelmed by despair. Some of the people whispered among themselves, wondering whether he would truly help them. Others stared at his face, questioning whether he had looked like that since arriving, whether he had aged, or whether that serious appearance was simply what a hero was supposed to have. Even so, everyone encouraged him, believing he would lead Degrifia to victory against the Demon King. After that, everything unfolded much like the stories told about legendary heroes. So-kun's journey became filled with friendship, victories, countless hardships, and endless adventures. Whenever his group found themselves at a disadvantage, he and his companions would overcome every obstacle together and continue moving forward. Looking back, Suzuki believed he had gained more than enough battle experience. He destroyed every enemy that stood in his way. Even mighty dragons fell before him. Whenever he defeated another powerful monster, the people praised him as the hero they had expected, admiring how dependable and impressive he had become. His companions assured him that they would handle the rest because they trusted him completely. At the end of that long struggle, after countless sacrifices and tremendous effort from everyone involved, the Demon King was finally defeated. The boy who had once been nothing more than a discouraged middle school student carrying the title of hero in name alone had finally become someone worthy of being called a true hero. The entire kingdom celebrated alongside Sasuke. Peace had finally returned to Degreefia, and everyone recognized him as the savior who had protected their world. People everywhere expressed their gratitude to him. From that day forward, his popularity grew beyond anything he had imagined. He was admired, praised, and even recorded in history textbooks and children's picture books as the central hero of the story. During the celebration, several men who were enjoying their drinks called Sasuke over and told him that Degreefia would continue relying on him from then onward. Sasuke smiled with confidence and accepted that responsibility, believing there was no opponent he could not defeat. From that moment on, he thought those future battles would be theirs to face together. That was how it should have been. Then Sasuke suddenly opened his eyes. He found himself standing there completely naked once again. He had no idea what had happened, where he was, or even what he had been doing before that moment. As far as he could remember, he had been drinking, gotten carried away, and was about to enter the bath. As he looked around, he realized the sandbox nearby seemed strangely familiar. It was the very place where he used to make mud balls as a child. At that moment, the truth slowly became clear. Sokuin realized that he had returned. Without warning, he had been forced back from the other world. The reality struck him all at once as he understood that he had returned to his original world. Still confused, he could not stop wondering what had become of Degreefia, why he had suddenly been sent back, and who had caused it. Before he could gather his thoughts, someone approached him. Irritated and overwhelmed, Sasuke snapped in frustration, unable to understand what was happening. Before he could finish, a police officer grabbed him by the shoulders and calmly asked about his occupation. Feeling embarrassed, especially while standing there completely naked, Sasuke answered that he was a hero. The officer admitted that it sounded brave in its own way. Sasuke had once again found himself naked in front of strangers. As the questioning continued, he explained that he had been chosen as the hero who brought peace to another world. When the officer asked where he worked, Sasuke replied that he did not have a job because he had always been out on adventures. The officer dryly remarked that he certainly seemed to be on quite an adventure now. Back in his own world, however, reality was much harsher. To everyone around him, he was nothing more than a suspicious man with no employment history. The officer questioned whether he had ever worked honestly. Sasuke insisted that he had worked harder than anyone by defeating the Demon King. Thus began the new life of Sata Sasuke, the former hero, now unemployed and starting over from the beginning. Sasuke had once been the hero who was summoned to another world and defeated the Demon King. Before he even realized what had happened, he had been returned to his original world, where he now found himself being questioned by the police. He had no idea what they were talking about, nor did he know what was going to happen next. The officers questioned him again, asking why he had been wandering around the park and referring to him as unemployed. Sasuke immediately objected, insisting that he was not jobless but the hero who had saved Degreefia. The officers dismissed his explanation as the same unbelievable story he had been repeating, reminding him that demon kings did not exist. Even so, Sasuke refused to back down. To him, they absolutely existed. He could even sense what felt like a demonic presence somewhere within the city. He insisted that if such an enemy appeared, he would gladly defeat it. Having already defeated dragons before, he believed there was no reason for anyone to panic, and he thought the officers were simply wasting their time. The police concluded that Sasuke seemed confused about his memories. One of the officers decided that, regardless of anything else, he should at least put some clothes on first. Sasuke continued insisting that everything he was saying was true. The officers asked him to wait while one of them recalled an old missing person report from years ago. Not long afterward, an elderly woman and an elderly man rushed towards Sasuke. More people followed, calling out to him with tears in their eyes. They were his family members. Sasuke stood there in confusion as his grandmother anxiously asked one of the officers whether he was healthy. The officer reassured the family that there was no need to worry. They had simply found him walking around the streets while claiming to be a hero, so he seemed healthy enough in his own way. Sasuke became frustrated when they treated everything like a joke. To him, he truly had returned from another world. Before he could continue, his grandfather struck him lightly on the head, snapping him back to reality. His grandfather had been worried sick ever since he disappeared and immediately dragged him away. Scolding him for always getting lost in his daydreams, his grandfather told him to stop talking nonsense because they were going home. And just like that, the story of the hero came to an abrupt end. Sasuke accepted that he simply had to continue living in this world. The boy who had once been told to become a hero had truly fulfilled that role. Compared to a world where a demon king threatened everyone's lives, A peaceful world without such enemies should have been much easier to live in. On the way home, his grandparents quietly talked with each other. His grandmother wondered whether Sasuke would really be alright, while his grandfather believed that he was a strong young man who would eventually be fine. That marked the beginning of Sasuke's second chance at life, and he intended to make the most of it. Up until then, everything had gone reasonably well. If the story had ended there, it would have been a simple one. The reality, however, was far from simple. Sasuke had never held a real job before, so writing a resume was a completely new experience. As he prepared to fill it out, he suddenly realized something important. He had been summoned to another world when he was only 13 years old. Since he had devoted his entire life to becoming a hero, he had never graduated from middle school. Then another harsh fact struck him. His education had actually ended after elementary school. His academic background was far worse than he had realized. Eventually, Sasuke sat across from an interviewer as another job interview began. The interviewer informed him that the interview would now start, and Sasuke politely accepted before asking to be treated kindly. The interviewer asked him to explain the skills he had learned so far. Sasuke answered honestly that he possessed reinforcement techniques using magic, allowing him to strengthen his physical abilities. Because of those abilities, he believed he was perfectly suited for manual labor. He even considered himself tougher than a dragon, making him confident that he would never miss work because of physical weakness. He also explained that he had traveled across the world while fighting the Demon King, so he hoped they would leave outdoor work to him. Having overcome countless hardships through his training, he sincerely wanted the opportunity to work for their company. The interviewer remarked that those kinds of abilities might have been impressive if Sasuke had at least graduated from middle school first. Sasuke argued that those skills had been extremely valuable in Degrifia. The interviewer then asked again, requesting a more realistic skill that could actually be used on Earth. That question left Sasuke speechless. He struggled to think of anything besides fighting. After thinking for a moment, he finally answered that he was good at making mud balls. Because of that, he was rejected. After returning home, Sasuke sat alone on a bench, exhausted and frustrated by everything that had happened. He muttered to himself that even this company refused to believe in his magic. Even though he had carefully listed the proof of his adventures, the quests he had completed, and the many magic spells he knew, none of it mattered. He even remembered proudly mentioning how perfectly he could make mud balls, only to become even more frustrated. Before long, his grandfather entered his room and told him to quiet down. Even after all those setbacks, Sasuke gathered his determination and continued searching for work. However, his educational background remained a major obstacle everywhere he went. Employers questioned the resume he had written, even asking whether he had filled it out while crying, before telling him they could not hire him. Being nothing more than an elementary school graduate left him at a severe disadvantage. Once again, Sasuke found himself sitting alone in the park. As he reflected on everything, he came to the conclusion that looking for a job was even more difficult than defeating the Demon King. Still, moving from being unemployed to becoming a part-time worker was at least a step forward. With that thought in mind, he decided to keep moving ahead, one small step at a time. In the end, he managed to secure a single part-time job at a local supermarket. Sasuke quietly reflected on how all of his friends were steadily moving forward with their lives. Some were continuing to higher education, while others had already found jobs, yet he felt as though he alone had been left standing in the same place. Ko had already found work, and Yoshi had apparently been accepted into an elite school. Thinking about it further, he wondered what had become of his best friend, Ken. He had heard that Ken had moved away, so he had probably gone on to continue his studies as well. Sasuke knew he needed to catch up soon. His mind was filled with nothing but worries. At the very least, he wanted to become someone who no longer caused concern for his family and friends. After all, they had cried so much when he suddenly returned from Degrifia. Before heading home, he decided it was time to work on another resume. As Sasuke went to throw away some trash, he suddenly heard a frightened voice pleading for someone to stop. Nearby, several men on motorcycles had surrounded a young woman. One of them laughed while asking what the problem was, while another insisted that they only wanted her to spend a little time with him. The woman, clearly frightened, refused and begged them not to come any closer. One of the men ignored her fear, stepped even closer, and mocked her trembling voice while calling her cute. Watching the scene from a distance, Sasuke wondered what those men were doing as he walked down the stairs toward them. He was already feeling miserable, and this only made things worse. Sasuke called out to them, sarcastically referring to them as an endangered species. He told them to stop acting tough because they were living in the Reiwa era and warned that he would call the police if they continued. One of the men looked at him in surprise and questioned what his problem was, mocking his tired appearance before threatening him to stay out of it. The man even called him an old geezer. Sasuke immediately objected. He was only naturally older looking than his actual age. The insult irritated him even more. He wondered what was so wrong with looking mature. His mood had already been terrible, and now they had chosen to mock him on top of everything else. One of the men grabbed the young woman's arm and tried to pull her along, insisting that they should all go have some fun together. She struggled desperately to break free, pleading for them to stop because they were hurting her. Suzuki shouted at them once again, reminding them that the woman had clearly told them to stop and insisting that they had gone far enough. As he reached out and grabbed the woman's arm, he finally saw her face. The moment he recognized her, he froze. It was Shikigami Katsumi. She had been close to him ever since they were children. She had also been his first love, the girl who had captured his heart. In an instant, the painful memory returned to him. Just before he had been summoned to Degrifia, he had confessed his feelings to her, only to be rejected. Now, Katsumi was crying out for help. One of the men tightened his grip on her while another ordered his companion to force her onto the motorcycle, making sure she could handle all of them. The man then turned towards Suzuki, provoking him while calling him a wrinkled-faced punk. He encouraged him to scream if he wanted and claimed that he was about to enjoy the little gift standing before him, telling Suzuki to watch carefully. Suzuki did not answer immediately. Instead, he focused on Katsumi, determined that she only needed to wait a little longer because he was going to rescue her. Without hesitation, Suzuki stepped forward and drove a punch straight into the man's stomach. Katsumi stood there in complete shock. The man recovered and accepted the challenge, eager for a fight as he prepared to throw a punch of his own. Suzuki remained calm and accepted the confrontation without hesitation. The fight began. As the street fight broke out, Katsumi found herself cheering for Suzuki. Deep inside, she believed he should hold himself back. By now, he had already learned his lesson. This place was not Degrafia. It was not a world where he could solve everything with a single punch. If he lost control there, all he would do was make everyone worry once again. Suzuki was struck by one of the men, who proudly claimed it had been a clean hit. After Suzuki was knocked to the ground, Katsumi quickly rushed over to him. Suzuki could only think about how pathetic he looked. It was hard for him to believe that he had once been called a hero after ending up like that. The man told his companion that they should leave because the fight had become boring and was ruining the mood. As they walked away, he shouted for Suzuki not to ever stand against them again, calling him an old man. He declared that the area now belonged to the Venom Legion. Suzuki muttered in frustration, refusing to accept people calling themselves by a name like that. Katsumi carefully approached him and asked if he was all right. Tears filled her eyes as she apologized over and over, insisting that she never meant for him to get hurt because of her. When she gently pressed her handkerchief against his injury, he flinched in pain, and she carefully told him to stay still. Katsumi quietly remarked that it had been a long time, and Suzuki agreed. It had been an incredible 4.5 years since he had last seen Katsumi's face. His thoughts drifted back to the day he returned from the other world, when the police took him into custody. During all that time, she had never once come to see him. He wondered if it was because she had rejected him back then. To him, it seemed only natural that things had become awkward between them. Katsumi admitted that moments like these felt incredibly nostalgic. She wondered if he still remembered how they used to spend their childhood playing together at that park. Suzuki would always lead her on little adventures, and they would keep playing until she eventually stumbled and fell. Katsumi apologized for all the time she had caused him pain, believing she had always been the one bringing him trouble. Tears began falling again as she continued apologizing. It was clear that she had carried that guilt with her for a very long time. Suzuki paused before gently telling her not to blame herself so much. To him, it was not even a serious injury. Katsumi admitted that she had regretted everything all those years. She believed that if she had never said those hurtful words back then, perhaps he would never have disappeared from her life forever. Suzuki was stunned as memories of Katsumi stopping him that day returned to his mind. Even so, he knew he had to clear up that misunderstanding. All this time, someone had been waiting for him to return after his disappearance. He began to wonder if she had truly believed it was all her fault. Maybe that was why she had never come to see him until now. Suzuki reached out and grabbed her, determined to make her understand that none of it had been her fault. Katsumi continued crying, and he knew he had to explain everything. The problem was that he had no idea how to do it. Every time he had spoken about the other world, no one had ever believed him. Even so, he had to clear up the misunderstanding. Suzuki asked her to listen, even though he could not promise she would believe what he was about to say. Katsumi looked confused as he explained that, on that day, he had been transported to another world far away from there. Before he could continue, someone suddenly bumped into them. The man announced that he had finally found Katsumi. He grabbed her and accused Suzuki of hiding her there. Katsumi called the man Shindo, while Suzuki quietly wondered who the handsome young man was. The man politely asked if Suzuki was Katsumi's friend and said it was nice to meet him. He introduced himself as Ryo Shido, explaining that he was Katsumi's classmate before offering a handshake. Suzuki accepted it and returned the greeting. Suzuki then asked about Katsumi's club activities. Katsumi explained that she belonged to the volunteer club at school and that she had a meeting with the neighborhood association that day. Shido then asked if he happened to be Sadu. After Suzuki confirmed it, he wondered how Shido already knew his name. Shido explained that he had heard Katsumi had a refined childhood friend. He honestly remarked that Suzuki carried himself with such confidence and authority that it was difficult to believe they were the same age. Shido added that Suzuki would probably look especially impressive wearing a suit with his calm and polished appearance. Feeling a little envious, he laughed. Suzuki could only wonder what that guy was talking about. Katsumi quickly stopped Shido, telling him that he was being rude. Shido laughed, apologized, and reminded her that they needed to leave because they were going to be late. He gently pulled Katsumi along before saying goodbye to Suzuki and telling him they would see each other again. Katsumi also called out, hoping they could meet again soon and finally have a proper conversation. She treated it as a promise. Suzuki gave a nervous laugh as he said goodbye, agreeing that there would be a next time. As Suzuki watched the two of them walk away, he noticed the natural closeness they shared. In his mind, that could only mean the handsome young man was Katsumi's boyfriend. The thought left him feeling crushed. He quietly sat down on a nearby bench and silently bid farewell to his first love. Even then, he could not help admiring how Katsumi had grown into such a beautiful woman. Naturally, there was no way other men would simply leave someone like her alone. Even though he understood that, he still could not stop himself from feeling discouraged. He stretched out across the bench and complained to himself about how exhausting everything felt. All he wanted was to go home and lie down. Then another thought hit him, making him even more frustrated. He had completely forgotten that he still had his part-time job that day. No matter how many times reality knocked him down, he still had to keep working just to survive. Reality truly was difficult to accept. Later, Suzuki welcomed customers while carrying their purchases. Smiling in customer service did not come naturally to him, but he was determined to do his best. He needed to adapt to society as quickly as possible. A woman approached and asked where the eggs were located. Suzuki honestly had no idea where they were himself. He politely asked her to wait for a moment while he checked. The woman laughed at him, mocking him for not even knowing where the eggs in his own workplace were. She joked that his brain must be worse than a chicken's and even questioned whether he had received a proper education before laughing again. Inside, Suzuki quietly admitted that he had received an education, but he had left halfway through. At that moment, another employee stepped in and politely asked how she could help. She directed the customer to the egg section by asking her to follow to the right. The employee was Sasamine, and shortly afterward the store manager placed a reassuring hand on Suzuki's shoulder. The manager comforted him, telling him not to worry because he would gradually get the hang of the job. Suzuki felt a wave of relief. His manager's kindness felt like a warm embrace. To him, it truly felt like he had found the best part-time job possible. When the shift ended, the manager praised everyone for their hard work and thanked them for a job well done. Afterward, Sasamine suggested that she and Suzuki walk home together. As they walked, Suzuki thanked her for backing him up earlier. He admitted that it always felt as though he was the one being supported. Sasamine brushed it off, explaining that she was simply grateful for all the heavy lifting he always helped with. Sasamine Miko was Suzuki's senior at work. If Suzuki had followed the normal path through school, they would have been classmates. She also had an incredibly large chest, so noticeable that Suzuki compared it to watermelons. Suzuki remarked that she was a very caring person. Hearing that made Sasamine happy, especially knowing he genuinely thought so. She then shared that people at school had recently been asking about her plans for the future. At the moment, she was considering becoming a nursery teacher. Suzuki replied that the job suited her perfectly, and hearing that made her smile once again. Sasamine then turned the question towards Suzuki, asking what he wanted to become in the future. He admitted that, for now, he was focused on working part-time while searching for a job. He did not have anything he truly wanted to pursue yet. Looking back on everything, it felt as though life had thrown one challenge after another at him without ever giving him a break. He then asked if there was anything he was actually good at. Sasamine answered that there certainly was. She pointed out that he was secretly incredibly muscular, with arms and veins that stood out like worms. Suzuki blushed, admitting that hearing that was becoming a little embarrassing. Sasamine simply laughed, understanding exactly how he felt. Sasamine believed that people who truly put in the effort would always be able to do what they could. Hearing those words, Suzuki wondered if she was some kind of goddess. He admitted to himself that maybe he should start trying a little harder. Sasamine encouraged him to keep at it, believing it would be doing everyone a favor. She also mentioned that walking home with someone like Suzuki made her feel safe. Then she asked if he had heard the strange rumors spreading around town lately. According to those stories, they would suddenly appear out of nowhere, as if they were standing right there. Suzuki wondered if she meant perverts, but Sasamine brushed that idea aside. She explained that she was not talking about perverts this time. What she meant was ghosts. They simply appeared without warning. Suzuki looked at her with disbelief and gave a sarcastic response about how frightening that sounded before walking ahead. Sasamine hurried after him, convinced that he probably thought she was just being a silly girl. She knew many people dismiss those kinds of stories as something children believed during a certain phase of life. Still, she continued explaining the rumors. People claimed they had seen something like a dark shadow crawling out from the darkness before making eerie ghostly sounds. Suzuki stared at her, wondering what that strange sound had been. For a brief moment, he even questioned whether Sasamine had lost her mind. She noticed that he still did not seem convinced, but he insisted that he believed her completely. That response only left Sasamine feeling frustrated. To Suzuki, ghosts were nothing compared to the things he had already witnessed. He had seen creatures and events far beyond anything ordinary. Even if ghosts truly existed, they would not frighten him at all. Without warning, Suzuki suddenly became alert and began looking around. Sasamine continued talking, admitting that walking home alone terrified her. To her, the trip home felt like a nightmare. Although her mother often said she would come to pick her up, it almost never happened. Suzuki listened to her while continuing to scan the area. He suggested that she could try walking home with the other part-time workers or ask the manager for a ride. His words left Sasamine slightly confused, but he added that he would walk her home whenever he could. Sasamine asked if that was really alright, thinking that perhaps she should accept the offer. She then asked for his contact information, and Suzuki agreed, saying it would make it easier for them to reach each other. Sasamine smiled after noticing that Suzuki was still using a flip phone. Suzuki admitted that he had never been very good with modern technology and that his knowledge had been left behind in the past. Sasamine recommended that he get a smartphone before saying goodbye. After she left, Suzuki's thoughts returned to the strange presence he had sensed. He wondered if that was really a ghost. It did not feel like some vague or uncertain existence. Instead, he questioned the unusual aura surrounding it. His instincts immediately pointed toward monsters. That feeling was unmistakable. It was the aura of creatures filled with magical energy. No matter how much he thought about it, he could not shake the feeling that monsters were hiding somewhere within the city. He had carried that suspicion ever since returning from the other world, wondering why that familiar presence felt so close. Suzuki suddenly broke into a run. He had no idea what in the world was happening there anymore. During the night, the town became surrounded by a powerful magical aura. Suzuki immediately realized there were two separate sources, but he had no idea what was happening. Magic itself existed within every living creature on Earth. It was as common as the air surrounding them. The only difference was the level of concentration. However, the magical energy coming from those two presences was overwhelming. Since returning from the other world, this was the first time Suzuki had sensed an aura like this. Then, without warning, a man descended from the sky, spinning through the air before landing on top of a streetlight. He clutched his shoulder, showing clear signs of injury. Suzuki was stunned by the sudden appearance, and the man was just as surprised. He found it impossible to believe that a civilian was inside the barrier. The man immediately urged Suzuki to leave the area, but Suzuki refused because he was worried about the man's serious injuries. The man told him not to worry about him, but before he could finish his warning, a deafening growl echoed through the area. Everything in the creature's path was destroyed as a giant tiger appeared. The monster looked at the man and wondered if he truly believed he could escape. Suzuki could only stare in shock after seeing an actual monster. The monster noticed that there were now two people before it and decided that it would eat both of them together. The injured man stepped forward and made it clear that he would not allow anyone to harm the civilian. He then gathered magic into his hand. The moment Suzuki saw the glowing energy forming, he immediately recognized it as magic. The magician released his magic toward the monster, but the beast moved with incredible speed, avoiding every spell that was fired at it. As Suzuki watched the battle unfold, he had no doubt that one was a monster and the other was a magician. There had been countless monsters and magicians in the other world, but he was completely shocked because no one had ever told him that they also existed on Earth. The monster continued dodging every attack, while the magician grew increasingly frustrated because the beast was simply too fast. The monster eventually struck the magician with a powerful blow, and the impact sent pain through his body. The monster mocked the weakness of humans, treating his injury with contempt. Suzuki had countless questions racing through his mind, but he knew they would have to wait. He quickly caught the magician before he could hit the ground, then stepped forward and told the monster that enough was enough while positioning himself in front of the injured man. The magician could only look at him in surprise. He stepped forward despite the magician desperately trying to stop him. The magician panicked, warning him that the opponent was a tiger, but Suzuki continued walking. Suzuki stared directly at the monster, calling it a tiger and wondering if it was the one behind the ghost rumors spreading throughout the town. The monster questioned why that even mattered to him. To Suzuki, it mattered because this was the place where he lived. He had no intention of abandoning an injured person lying right in front of him. More than that, his friends had been living in fear because of this creature, wishing for it to disappear. The monster looked confused before bursting into laughter. It mocked Sasuke for acting so boldly despite being nothing more than a monkey, declaring that it would turn him into minced meat first. With incredible speed, the tiger charged straight at Sasuke. Moving with astonishing quickness, it leaped from every direction, making it impossible for the magician to keep track of its movements. Even so, Sasuke remained calm as he stood in place. The tiger chose to attack from behind, but just before its claw could reach him, Sasuke avoided the strike with a slight movement. He immediately grabbed the tiger by its tail and slammed it into the ground with enough force to shake the area. The magician could only watch in complete shock. The tiger quickly rolled away and recovered, but in the blink of an eye, Sasuke had already closed the distance. He drove a straight punch into the monster's face, sending it flying high into the air while spinning uncontrollably. The magician could hardly believe what he was seeing as the powerful tiger was overwhelmed so easily. As the monster began falling back down, Sasuke calmly waited below, prepared to deliver the final blow. The tiger desperately tried to stop him, but Sasuke's fist had already been set in motion. He unleashed a clean and powerful punch that made the tiger spit out blood from its mouth, leaving the magician stunned by the overwhelming force behind the attack. Sasuke lowered the tiger to the ground, stepped on its face, and delivered one more direct punch to ensure the monster was truly dead. After confirming the fight was over, he let out a quiet sigh. He then used an enchantment spell. It had been a long time since he had last used magic, but somehow it worked without any problems. The magician could only wonder what kind of power Sasuke had just displayed. Sasuke then turned toward him, checked whether he was alright, and prepared to call an ambulance immediately. The magician wanted to know who Sasuke really was. For a brief moment, Sasuke hesitated to introduce himself as a hero. Instead, he simply described himself as a courageous young man. Sasuke urged him to hold on, promising once again to call an ambulance. Instead, the injured magician slowly knelt before him and lowered his head in deep apology. Filled with sincere respect, he begged the courageous young man to accept him as a disciple. Hearing that request left Sasuke completely dumbfounded. Sasuke returned home and lay down, feeling pain throughout his entire body. It was most likely muscle soreness from using his body strengthening technique for the first time in a long while. Even so, he was still surprised that there were people on Earth who could use magic. The discovery made him feel that things might become complicated, so he simply chose to hurry home. The entire encounter had almost felt like a dream. Before he could rest for long, someone called out to him while apologizing for the interruption. Sasuke got up and told the visitor to be quiet. The visitor turned out to be the magician. He apologized for suddenly coming so late and respectfully introduced himself as Taitsuki Kuji. At that moment, Sasuke realized that the previous night's events had not been a dream after all, and he closed the door. Even from the other side, Takatsuki continued expressing his deep gratitude for the help he had received the previous night. He asked Sasuke to open the door. Sasuke could only wonder how Katsuki had even managed to find his address. Takatsuki continued calling from outside because he had something important to discuss, asking Sasuke to help them with their honorable mission. Sasuke asked what mission he meant. Takatsuki explained that he was only asking because he had seen that Sasuke was a first-class wizard. Since they were no longer receiving reinforcements from Alteria, they had no other choice but to ask him to lend them his strength. Sasuke admitted that he had no idea what Takatsuki was talking about. He apologized, explaining that he truly did not understand their situation, and he also asked what Alteria was supposed to be. Another voice responded with surprise that he did not even know the world's magic organization, Alteria. A woman wearing a suit stepped forward and observed that Sasuke apparently was not an official wizard. Takatsuki introduced her as his teacher, Tsukumura. Tsukumura explained that what they needed to discuss was confidential and suggested continuing the conversation inside. Sasuke was relieved that his grandfather and grandmother were not home that day. They all entered the house and took their seats. Tsukumura explained that Alteria was the largest wizard organization on Earth, and that they belonged to a magic school affiliated with it. She introduced herself as Tsukumura Kane, one of the school's teachers. She also introduced Takatsuki Kuji as a third-year student in the school's division. Sasuke asked about the magic school, surprised that Earth's magic system was already so well established. Tsukumura also explained that besides Taitsuki, there were 4 other students with them. She had brought her students to the city as part of their practical training. She asked whether Sasuke had ever heard the rumors about the Kanto High Divine Swordsmen, the top 5 students of their school. When Sasuke gave no response, she understood that he had not. She then explained that Alteria had assigned them to carry out that practical training. Their mission was to exterminate demons, eliminate every demon that appeared in the city, and restore the flow of the ley lines. Takatsuki explained that the demons had proven to be much stronger than expected, which was why he had ended up so badly injured the previous night. At that rate, not only they but even the city's residents would eventually be put in danger. Unfortunately, the timing was terrible, making it impossible to expect reinforcements from Alteria. Because of that, They sincerely needed Sasuke's overwhelming strength and earnestly asked for his cooperation. Sasuke asked whether the demons they were referring to were creatures like the tiger from the previous day. He then asked how many were still left in the city. Sukimura replied that, based on their estimates, around 14 demons remained, and one of them appeared to be especially formidable. Sasuke quietly set his glass of water down and listened to everything they had to say. After hearing them out, he agreed to cooperate with their mission. Sukimura asked if he was truly certain. To be honest, even after explaining everything, she admitted that she was against involving him. She turned to the Tagatsuki, questioning whether he had been paying attention, because Sasuke clearly knew nothing about the circumstances surrounding wizards. Sasuke had never studied magic at a proper school and was simply calling himself a wizard while only having vague knowledge. Takatsuki listened and remarked that there were people like that. Sukimura then explained that Alteria did not provide compensation to unofficial wizards. In other words, they would be asking him to fight without receiving anything in return. Risking Sasuke's life for no reward was something only a fool would do, and it was not something a responsible adult should even consider. Sasuke told her that this was not about gain or loss, and that much he understood. It was true that there were many things he did not know because he had never learned magic on Earth. He was certain that, from her point of view, he was simply one of those unofficial wizards, but none of that mattered. He slowly clenched his fist as he explained that those demons could put his family and friends in danger. Knowing that, there was no way he could simply continue living his normal life as if nothing was happening. He believed that he could fight, and he was confident that he would not fall short even compared to her. A faint grin appeared on Sukimura's face in response to his confidence. Takatsuki looked towards Sasuke, and Sukimura admitted that they were not in a position to be selective. She formally asked for Sasuke's cooperation, and he accepted. After that they left. As they parted ways, Sukimura informed Sasuke that she would let him know when the mission would begin and that Takatsuki would come to pick him up. Earth had become a world filled with nothing but harsh realities for Sasuke. He had once believed that the power he gained as a hero in the other world would never have any use there, but now he knew he could still fight. He could still protect others, and that was something he truly could do at that moment. Sasuke strengthened his resolve, convincing himself that he could do it and that he would do it. Sasuke headed outside after finishing a conversation with someone. While speaking on the phone, he explained that he would be home late that day and asked if they could save some dinner for him. He assured them that he was fine and that he had already informed his grandfather. Not long after, Takatsuki came flying toward him. Calling out to Sasuke, he mentioned that everyone had been waiting for him. After landing on the ground, he asked whether Sasuke had contacted his family, commenting that it was thoughtful of him. Sasuke replied that it was nothing special and wondered if that was not simply a normal thing to do. Takatsuki suggested they leave, explaining that the meeting place was at the park. As they made their way there, he asked whether Sasuke had thought about his earlier proposal. Sasuke asked what he meant, and Takatsuki reminded him about becoming his disciple. Sasuke recalled that conversation and remembered that Takatsuki had indeed brought it up before. However, he refused, explaining that he still had to focus on finding a job. Takatsuki found it hard to accept the answer and wondered if he was simply not strong enough, or if it was because of his age. He questioned whether Sasuke believed that someone his age could never become as strong as him. Sasuke pointed out that he was only 18 years old and that there was not much of an age difference between them. He then apologized, admitting that he had assumed Takatsuki was at least around 25 years old. Takatsuki urged Sasuke to hurry, but Sasuke stopped him for a moment and questioned whether he really looked 7 years older than him. From the distance, someone shouted that they were too slow and already late, prompting Sasuke to quickly catch up with Takatsuki. Once they arrived, Takatsuki scolded the woman, reminding her not to shout because she would disturb the nearby residents. The woman looked unconvinced and questioned his attitude, wondering if he was making fun of her. Sukimura calmly noted that Sasuke had finally arrived. Another man mentioned that he had heard Takatsuki had brought someone who would be helping them. He wanted to know if it was true that this was the wizard who had defeated a powerful demon alone. Sukimura let out a sigh, while the woman urged them to stop wasting time and introduce him properly, also asking whether his abilities had been confirmed. Sasuke realized that these were the people Sukimura had been talking about, the students from the magic school who had accepted Alteria's mission. They were the Kanto High Divine Swordsmen, the 5 strongest students in the school. The moment Sasuke saw them, he was surprised by how good-looking they all were. He even thought that if they formed an idol group, they would probably become very popular. His attention was especially drawn to the black-haired girl standing beside Sukimura because she was exceptionally cute. But the moment she turned around, his surprise grew even greater when he recognized her as Kazumi. Sasuke froze in shock the moment he saw Kazumi. He could not believe she was there and wondered what she was doing with him. Meanwhile, Sukimura asked Takatsuki where the man he had mentioned was. Takatsuki replied that he would bring him over immediately, but before he could do so, Sasuke quickly hid inside a nearby bush. Takatsuki looked around in confusion, wondering where he had gone, until Sasuke quietly signaled that he was hiding there. The top students could only wonder what was happening. Takatsuki found Sasuke and asked what was wrong. Sasuke wanted to know if that was really Kazumi and not some kind of doppelganger. He then pointed toward another person, mentioning the sparkling prince standing beside her. Looking at him more carefully, Sasuke realized he was the same person who had been with Kazumi before. He remembered hearing something about them belonging to the same club. Takatsuki explained that whenever they carried out missions outside the school in residential areas, they were instructed to tell people they were participating in club activities. The existence of magic had to remain hidden from ordinary people. Hearing that explanation, Sasuke finally connected everything together and realized that Kazumi also attended that magic school. Takatsuki went on to explain that Shikigami possessed exceptional talent in healing magic and was widely known as the priestess of healing because of her remarkable abilities. She had been the one who completely healed the injuries Takatsuki suffered during his battle with the demon. At the same time, she was also a summoner who had already formed contracts with several high-ranking divine beasts. As for Shishido, he was a wizard who possessed the rare lightning attribute, a power considered to be on an entirely different level from the basic elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. He was also the man chosen, after hundreds of years, to wield the divine blade Excalibur. Sasuke became uneasy after hearing the title Priestess of Healing, wondering when Kazumi had ended up with such an impressive nickname. He also realized that the title Kanto High Divine Swordsman had actually been referring to that prince-like young man. Takatsuki asked whether he knew her, and Sasuke admitted that Kazumi was his childhood friend. However, she had never known that he could use magic, and he had never imagined that she was a wizard either. It became clear to Sasuke that the existence of magic was carefully hidden from ordinary people. That was probably why Kazumi had never told him about it, or perhaps she simply never wanted him to find out. Thinking back, he remembered how quiet her home had always seemed. Perhaps that had something to do with her family's circumstances. Takatsuki asked what he planned to do. Sasuke admitted that he did not know, but until Kazumi chose to tell him about her situation herself, he believed it would be better to keep her unaware for the time being. They needed to make sure she never realized that Sasuke was serving as their backup. Takatsuki agreed with the plan, understanding that meeting everyone face-to-face like that would only make things more troublesome. After thinking for a moment, Takatsuki came up with an idea. He produced a simple disguise that could change Sasuke's appearance. It was nothing more than a mask, but as long as Sasuke kept it on, his identity should remain hidden. Sasuke wondered where Takatsuki had even pulled the mask from. He also realized that as long as Takatsuki avoided calling him by his real name, the disguise would be almost perfect. From then on, Takatsuki would simply refer to him as Sensei. Sasuke could only think that Takatsuki was a complete idiot. Even so, he decided to go along with it. As strange as the disguise looked, none of that mattered as long as they could keep the city safe. He would continue acting like some odd masked man so that Kazumi would never recognize him, and then he would deal with every one of those demons. Takatsuki enthusiastically supported the plan, and just to be safe, Sasuke also decided to change his voice so that it sounded like someone else's. Yuto called out to Itsuki, demanding to know what they had been whispering about and ordering them to hurry up and show themselves. When Sasuke finally stepped forward, everyone fell silent in disbelief. Their expressions made it obvious that they were all thinking the same thing. A very strange man had appeared before them. Yuto immediately shouted at Takatsuki, wondering if this was some kind of joke. Takatsuki told her not to make such a fuss, though even Sasuke felt that she had a fair point. Yuto questioned the mask he was wearing and wondered if he had come there only to make fun of them. Takatsuki tried to calm her down, explaining that Sasuke had his own circumstances, but that only made her even angrier. She demanded to know what kind of circumstances could possibly force someone to wear a Hayatoko mask. Shishido gently patted Yuto on the head and encouraged her to calm down, reminding her that judging someone by their appearance was not a good thing. Since the words came from him, she accepted them without further argument. Shishido then turned towards Sasuke and asked if he was the great wizard who had come to help them. Takatsuki confirmed that he was. Yuto looked Sasuke over from head to toe and remarked that he seemed extremely suspicious. She was even surprised that Sukimura had approved of bringing him. She then asked for his name. Sasuke immediately panicked, realizing he had to come up with a fake identity while also making his voice sound different from usual. After thinking for a moment, he introduced himself as Cabbage Teru and greeted everyone. Yuto instantly lost her patience again, convinced that he was making fun of them. Sasuke casually mentioned that his favorite food was simmered chicken and vegetables, even though no one had asked. Yuto pointed out that she had never asked about that. Sasuke then told her not to question him too much, and she immediately complained about the strange way he kept ending his sentences. Sasuke found her amusing, which only made her even more annoyed because she had no interest in hearing that from someone like him. Sukimura stepped in and told Yuto to leave it at that. She then walked closer to Suzuki and quietly asked why he was dressed like someone preparing to perform at a summer festival. Suzuki explained that, because of certain circumstances, he was trying to hide his identity from Shikigami Kazumi. Sugimura asked about Kazumi, then replied that she did not mind as long as it did not interfere with the mission. However, she also pointed out that Kazumi already seemed to be looking at him suspiciously, unless she was simply imagining it. Suzuki could clearly feel Kazumi's intense gaze fixed on him. It felt as though two drills were piercing straight through him. Yuto called out to Tsukimura and insisted that she could not agree with cooperating alongside someone like him. Tsukimura understood her concerns, but she reminded everyone that this was the man who had defeated the Tiger Demon entirely on his own. She personally guaranteed his abilities. No matter what anyone thought, Cabbage Teru's cooperation had already been decided. With that settled, she instructed everyone to introduce themselves to him. The first to introduce herself was Yuto Mitsuki. She warned Suzuki that if he did anything strange, she would make sure he was thrown out. Next was Shishido Ryuya, who politely greeted him. The third was Tia Vermilion, who was also pleased to meet him. Finally, Shikigami Kazumi introduced herself. After greeting him, she wondered if they had met somewhere before. Suzuki calmly replied that she must have mistaken him for someone else, and Kazumi accepted the answer for the moment. She then asked if it was really true that he was such a powerful wizard because she wanted to hear more about him. Suzuki silently cursed to himself. Before the conversation could continue, Takatsuki called out to Tsukimura and suggested that she begin explaining the mission. Tsukimura agreed, deciding they had already wasted enough time. She gave everyone a brief explanation of their assignment. From that point onward, they would split into two groups. Takatsuki, Yuto, and Cabbage Teru would cover the mountainside, while Shikigami, Shishido, and Tsukimura herself would patrol the outskirts. She instructed them to search for demons and eliminate them as soon as they were found. If anything unusual happened, they were to report it immediately. Above all else, she reminded everyone to make sure they stayed alive. The groups separated and headed toward their assigned areas. Shishido called for Kazumi to hurry up, but she was still looking back at Suzuki. Meanwhile, Takatsuki called for Suzuki to follow, once again referring to him as sensei. Suzuki immediately told him to stop calling him that. Kazumi glanced at him once more. Even behind the mask, she recognized him. She wondered why he had to wear a mask and let out a sigh of disappointment. As they continued their mission, Yuto complained to Tia about not being placed in the same group as Ryuya, saying that it was disappointing. Tia reminded her that they were in the middle of an important mission. Yuto admitted she knew that. While Takatsuki shouted at Suzuki to hurry up, Suzuki warned Takatsuki that if he kept acting like that, he would make him stand in the hallway. Yuto scolded the two of them, telling them to stop fooling around. Suzuki teased her instead, telling her not to get so angry while calling her Mickey. Yuto immediately became irritated and demanded to know who he was calling Mickey. Tia stepped in and reminded everyone that they needed to hurry because the demons had already started moving. As Yuto landed on a tree, a sudden attack came from below. A monster sliced through the tree's trunk, forcing her to avoid the strike by flying away. Yuto immediately realized that the demons had appeared. Everyone quickly prepared for battle as they faced the enormous creature before them. It was a gigantic insect. Each of them readied their weapons and magic, and the mission finally began. 13 years earlier, the young Kazumi often wondered why she could not live like an ordinary child. She had always been told that the Shikigami family was a household of exceptional magicians and, as the eldest daughter, she carried an important responsibility. Because of that, she spent her days inside the house, practicing magic over and over again. As time passed, she felt as though she could barely breathe under that life. Even though her friends always wanted to invite her to play, they usually assumed that she would refuse. Her caretaker repeatedly reminded her not to spend too much time with ordinary children. If they ever discovered the existence of magic, she would no longer be allowed to play with her friends at all. Unable to hold back her feelings, Kazumi burst into tears and ran away while her caretaker desperately tried to stop her. At that moment, Kazumi hated everyone. She hated her father, her mother, and even her grandfather. She hated all of them. While crying, she wished that she could simply play with her friends like any other child. As she wandered into a nearby park, she noticed a boy quietly playing in the sand. Curious, she wondered what he was doing. She watched him closely. He wore a serious expression, making her wonder whether he even realized he was at a playground. Kazumi gently poked the boy, startling him and making him scream in surprise. Realizing what she had done, she immediately bowed and apologized for disturbing him. She introduced herself as Shikigami Kazumi and asked what he had been doing. The boy explained that he was making mud balls and showed one to her. Kazumi stared at it in amazement. It sparkled beautifully, and she found it incredibly pretty, even though it was only a mud ball. The boy was confused by her reaction and wondered why she seemed so fascinated by mud balls. Kazumi admitted that she had never even touched something like dirt before, leaving the boy surprised by such an unexpected answer. Kazumi decided to try making a mud ball herself while the boy quietly watched. She was surprised when she failed almost immediately. The boy explained that making a proper mud ball took time and would not turn out like his on the first try. Kazumi continued struggling, trying again and again. Seeing her determination, the boy suggested that they could make them together if she wanted. Kazumi's face turned slightly red. The boy then explained that there was no need to rush because he came to the park at the same time every day. Kazumi paused for a moment before happily thanking him and promising that she would definitely come back the next day. She insisted that she absolutely would. The boy found her enthusiasm a little overwhelming. Hearing that upset Kazumi, and she suddenly started crying. Her crying only grew louder, drawing the attention of the people nearby. The boy quickly apologized, explaining that he had never intended to upset her and desperately hoping she would stop crying. The neighborhood aunties began glaring at him, making the situation even more uncomfortable. Kazumi admitted that she hated lies, and she hated cruel lies even more. The boy apologized once again and promised that he would not lie anymore. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Kazumi realized she still did not know his name. When she asked, the boy remembered that he had never introduced himself. He finally introduced himself as Satu Suzuki. Tsukimura called out to Kazumi, but Kazumi was lost in thought and did not respond. She called her once again, and just as a monster suddenly appeared, Tsukimura ordered everyone to prepare themselves. That was enough to bring Kazumi back to her senses. The enormous monster immediately attacked her, but she managed to avoid the strike just in time. Kazumi quickly deployed a magical barrier for protection, while Shishido unleashed his lightning magic before checking whether she was alright. Tsukimura acknowledged the speed of his lightning magic, remarking that it was exactly what she expected from Shishido. Confidently, Shishido regarded the demons in the area as nothing more than practice targets and felt there was no need to even draw the divine sword against them. Even so, Tsukimura reminded everyone to remain cautious and never lower their guard. They had no way of knowing when a high-ranking demon might suddenly appear. As they continued moving, Shishido pointed out that it was unusual to see Kazumi distracted during a mission. He reassured her that everything would be fine because he would protect her. Kazumi apologized, but her thoughts remained on Suzuki. She still did not know what had happened to him, but she no longer wanted to remain unaware. She decided that she would face him and have a proper conversation with him. Meanwhile, the other group was already engaged in battle with another monster. Takatsuki alerted Tia that the creature had moved in a certain direction. Tia immediately used soulbind magic to restrain the monster, while Yudo declared that she would finish it herself by using Brise Fendes Vu. She struck the monster with her sword, finding it to be a decent opponent before defeating it. Meanwhile, Suzuki was still standing nearby, preparing himself to join the battle. Yudo questioned what he was doing because the fight had already ended. Suzuki admitted that he had not even gotten the chance to do anything. Takatsuki then asked Yudo why she had not allowed Suzuki to participate in the battle. Yudo insisted that she simply could not let someone like Cabbage join the fight. She repeated several times that she absolutely could not allow it. Suzuki quietly wondered if Yudo had really repeated the same thing 4 times. Takatsuki argued that Suzuki had volunteered to help with the demon hunt from the very beginning. However, Yudo insisted that everything about him seemed suspicious and that his appearance at that exact moment felt far too convenient. Growing irritated, she scolded Tadetsuki, arguing that if he had not brought along such a strange person, she would not have needed to be so cautious. Tia stepped in and tried to calm her down, but Yudo argued that they did not need any outside help in the first place. She pointed out that the mid-ranking demon they had just defeated would normally require around 10 ordinary magicians to overcome, yet the 3 of them had defeated it without much difficulty. Tia reminded her that not long ago, a high-ranking demon had appeared, and even Takatsuki had been unable to defeat it. As long as there was a possibility of facing another powerful enemy like that, they still needed the help of a collaborator. Yuto admitted that she understood and accepted that it could not be helped. Even so, she insisted that Cabbage should simply stay behind them and provide support instead. Suzuki hesitated before asking them to wait for a moment. He explained to Yudo that such a role would not work for him. His specialty was using mana to strengthen his own body, and he was not particularly skilled at magic that required him to project or deploy mana. Because of that, he simply could not fight in the way she wanted him to. Yudo became irritated and questioned whether Suzuki was serious. She scolded him, explaining that spells used to project mana outside the body were the most basic form of magic. She could not understand how someone who could not even perform such a fundamental technique could admit it without feeling embarrassed. Hearing those words reminded Suzuki of the time he had been told the exact same thing in the other world. Just as Mickey had pointed out, there was nothing he could say in response. Yudo then remarked that this was exactly why stray magicians should never be recruited. She turned to Takatsuki and questioned whether this was really the excellent magician he had spoken so highly of. Takatsuki's expression became serious as he warned Yuto not to insult his sensei any further. He was even prepared to settle the matter by proving which was stronger, his flames or her wind. Yuto showed no fear at all and immediately challenged him back, ready to fight if that was what he wanted. Watching the argument escalate, Suzuki silently complained to himself as it looked like the situation was about to turn into a real fight. He stepped in and urged them to stop, insisting that they should not fight because of him. Tia called out to Yuto and immediately cast a spell on her. Yuto demanded that the barrier around her be removed, but Tia calmly explained that this was not the time for pointless arguments, especially since she was still injured. Tia then healed Yuto's wound. After thanking Tia, Yuto allowed the barrier to be removed. Tia then informed everyone that she could still sense the presence of demons, estimating that they were about 210 meters to the northwest. Unnoticed by the group, someone was quietly watching them from above. Yuto immediately told everyone to head toward that location. Tia also called for Takatsuki to come along, even if he was still upset. Seeing that the argument had finally come to an end, Suzuki felt that things had somehow settled down. Despite possessing such incredible power, they were still students. To him, they looked as disorganized as grade school children during lunchtime. Suzuki then asked what he was supposed to do. Yuto bluntly told him to stay far away and throw rocks at the enemy instead. Suzuki decided that it would be best not to make her any angrier than she already was. Just before they moved out, Yuto remembered one more thing. She turned toward him and warned that if he got in her way, she would not hesitate to deal with him. Suzuki remained silent. High up in a nearby tree, a monster watched the entire exchange with a grin on its face. While the magic school students continued their mission to eliminate demons, one group searched through the residential area while the other advanced along the mountainside. Takatsuki called out to Tia and asked if the demon was just ahead. Without any hesitation, she confirmed that it was. Yuto immediately flew ahead, declaring that she would take the lead. Takatsuki quickly followed after her, warning that acting alone was dangerous. Watching the two of them, Suzuki thought they were certainly hot-blooded. If he did not hurry, they would leave him behind. As he prepared to move, he noticed Tia quietly staring at him. He asked if something was wrong. Tia remained silent for a moment before explaining that she wanted to apologize. Suzuki looked confused, but Tia clarified that she was apologizing for Mitsuki's rude behavior toward him. Suzuki asked why she felt the need to apologize. Tia explained that missions like this normally were not assigned to students. The demons they were facing were simply too powerful. Suzuki agreed with that assessment, remembering that Takatsuki had mentioned the same thing before. Tia continued by explaining that Miss Tsukamura had requested reinforcements from Alteria's Kanto branch. However, the response they received was that their current forces were sufficient to continue the operation, so no reinforcements would be sent. Hearing that, Suzuki could hardly believe it. To him, it sounded as though they had simply been told to deal with it themselves and carry on. Tia confirmed that was exactly what had happened. Because of the shortage of manpower, both the students and the city's residents were in serious danger. On top of that, there was currently no guardian capable of protecting the area. Then, at the very moment they found themselves in the worst possible situation, Suzuki suddenly appeared. Tia admitted that Suzuki had seemed extremely suspicious from the beginning. She had even considered the possibility that he might be a traitor connected to Alteria. Suzuki questioned what she meant by that. Tia explained that within the magical world, there were people who wanted others to fail their missions and lose their reputation. Quite a few magicians tried to raise their own status through those methods. Suzuki finally understood. From their perspective, he had appeared at exactly the moment they were most vulnerable to people with harmful intentions. At that point, everything made sense to him. No wonder they had been so suspicious of him. Yuto had acted so harshly because she wanted to protect her comrades from someone she could not trust. Thinking about it himself, Suzuki felt that if their positions had been reversed, he probably would have beaten himself up the moment he had shown up at the park. He even questioned whether wearing such a ridiculous mask had been a good idea, and he could not help but wonder if Takatsuki had been thinking straight when he came up with it. Tia explained that although Mitsuki acted tough, she was actually very frightened. That fear made her even more suspicious than usual, and it caused her words and actions to become much harsher than they normally were. Tia asked Suzuki not to blame her too much, explaining that no matter how terrible her words sounded, they did not truly reflect how she felt. Suzuki thought Tia was a kind-hearted girl. He told her that he understood and that he would do as she had asked regarding Yuto. Tia looked at him in surprise and asked if he truly meant it. Suzuki admitted that he had never really been angry with Yuto in the first place. Tia thanked him. Suzuki then asked that if she also found him suspicious, whether she really thought it was a good idea to tell him all of that. Tia admitted that she still had her suspicions, but she had never seen Takatsuki admire another person as much as he admired Suzuki. She found it difficult to explain, but she simply did not believe he was a bad person. That was her honest opinion. She also admitted that she liked him quite a lot before smiling warmly at him. Seeing that smile surprised Sasuke a little. He had not expected her to make such an expression. After a moment, he asked Tia if they should continue on their way. She agreed, saying that it was a good idea. Just as they were about to move, Takatsuki suddenly rushed back and grabbed onto a nearby tree to steady himself. Sasuke immediately wondered why he had returned. Before Takatsuki could explain, he collapsed to the ground, and blood quickly spread across the area. Tia immediately rushed over and supported him. She asked what had happened, and Takatsuki explained that they had encountered a large demon. It had caught them off guard, but before he could finish explaining what happened, Tia stopped him from speaking further. She noticed that his injuries were far more severe than she had expected. His skin had badly deteriorated, and the wound was so serious that even his ribs were exposed. She immediately asked about Mitsuki. Takatsuki revealed that Mitsuki had been abducted, causing Tia's eyes to widen in shock. He apologized for his own failure. Tia declared that she would take care of Takatsuki and ordered Sasuke to go after Mitsuki. However, Sasuke insisted on examining the wound first because he believed he might still be able to help. Tia agreed. Sasuke looked down at Takatsuki and remarked that he had gotten himself into quite a mess again. Takatsuki apologized once more, but Sasuke replied that there was no need for apologies because he needed to die. Without hesitation, Sasuke drove a powerful kick straight into Takatsuki's face, cracking his head. Even he felt that the attack had been slightly off because he had intended to finish it in a single blow. Tia froze in fear and demanded to know what he had just done. Sasuke immediately told her to stay back because the creature was still alive. Tia refused to believe him and questioned what he was talking about. As Takatsuki's body collapsed onto the ground, it began to change. Its body twisted and cracked as it transformed into a monster. Tia could only stare in disbelief. Sasuke explained that the creature's mimicry was incredibly detailed. Even he would not have noticed the deception if he had not examined it closely. His thoughts immediately turned to the real Takatsuki and Yudo. He wondered if this monster had also been responsible for causing Yudo to rush ahead on her own. He realized that something like this could never have been planned and carried out within only a day or two. Otherwise, the creature would never have been able to imitate someone so perfectly that even their own companions were fooled. Tia remained frozen, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. Sasuke then addressed the monster, telling it to speak if it was truly intelligent. The creature responded, remarking that humans certainly love talking. It wondered whether Sasuke was pleased that he had managed to see through its disguise. The moment Sasuke heard its voice, he realized it belonged to a woman. The monster expanded into its true, much larger form and declared that Sasuke should have quietly accepted death instead of struggling so much. Tia was stunned when she saw the monster using magic. According to everything Miss Tsukumura had taught them, it was extremely rare for a demon to cast spells. Sasuke remembered that the same had also been true for demonic beasts in the other world. The monster picked up a massive stone and hurled it toward them. Sasuke immediately tried to charge at it, but his movements suddenly slowed. His feet had become trapped in the ground, making him realize that the monster had secretly cast another spell earlier. The giant stone came crashing toward them. Sasuke struggled to hold it back for as long as he could, but it was far too heavy. The overwhelming force pushed him off the edge of the cliff. The massive stone slammed into the ground with Sasuke beneath it. Watching from above, Tia could only stare in shock as she called out to Toru. Tia could only watch in shock as the massive boulder completely overwhelmed Sasuke. The monster calmly declared that the masked man was already dead and remarked on how pitiful his end had been. She could not understand what had just happened. She wondered whether the attack had been a stone pillar bullet or some form of earth magic. Everything had happened in an instant. The monster then asked whether it should send her to the same place as the masked man. At that moment, Tia realized that only one thing was certain. She was the only one left who could stop the demon. The demon immediately attacked, throwing a powerful punch toward her. Tia quickly raised a magical barrier to block the blow. As she struggled to hold it in place, she could clearly feel how overwhelming the monster's strength was. The monster grabbed the barrier, and cracks rapidly spread across its surface. Realizing it was about to shatter, Tia immediately activated Soul Bind and Heavenly Ring. The barrier finally broke apart, but as the monster forced its way through, the combined power of Soul Bind and Heavenly Ring wrapped tightly around its body, squeezing and restraining it. It was the strongest sealing technique ever created by the celestial magicians, and Tia could only hope that it would be enough. The monster immediately recognized the technique as one specifically designed to capture powerful prey. It remarked that the spell was strong enough to strangle even a whale to death. Tia was stunned that even such a powerful sealing technique could not hold it. The demon easily broke free and remarked that she was remarkably skilled for a student. Even so, her technique was far too weak to bind someone like him. Tia was thrown to the ground. The monster explained that the humans it truly had business with were different people, making her seem somewhat inferior compared to them. Tia already understood that herself. Her thoughts turned to her companions, who possessed powers such as the Divine Sword, Divine Beasts, Ghostly Fire, and the Typhoon Sword. Compared to them, she was not exceptional in attack magic, healing magic, or strengthening magic. Even the one spell she had always been most confident in, Soul Bind, had failed. Even so, she knew she had no choice but to find a way to stop the monster. She demanded to know what the demon had done to Hitsuki and Mitsuki. She needed an answer because she had to save her friends. The monster simply mocked her, claiming that it did not know. It admitted that it never really knew how to hold back, so the two of them might already be dead. Without giving up, Tia immediately activated body strengthening and rushed forward at incredible speed. She appeared behind the monster and drove a punch into its face. The monster answered with a single blow to her body. The impact made Tia cough up blood. The demon told her that it was useless because she could do nothing against him. Tia could hardly accept it. Even though she was one of the year's top students, and even though her friends were in terrible danger, she could do nothing. She wondered how someone like her could be so useless. She questioned whether she truly lacked the strength to save anyone. While desperately holding back her emotions, Tia repeatedly apologized. The monster told her not to take it personally. To fulfill its dearest wish, it simply needed to make use of her as well. Just as the demon prepared to cast magic on her, Tia cried out and forced herself to attack once more, throwing another punch. Before her fist could reach the monster, another fist struck first. Suzuki's punch smashed directly into the monster's face, sending it rolling across the ground again and again before it finally stopped and regained its balance. Suzuki mocked the monster by calling it a monkey. He declared that the fight should stay one-on-one because it had been a long time since he had become this angry. The monster stared at him in complete disbelief. Tia was equally shocked to see him standing there unharmed. The demon could not believe it. It insisted that Suzuki should have been struck directly by the stone pillar bullet. It could not understand the strange power it was sensing from him because that attack should have been powerful enough to kill him. Suzuki admitted that he had not expected to be hit either. He figured he had simply become rusty after not fighting for such a long time. He then challenged the demon, declaring that he would tear it to pieces. The monster immediately flinched before leaping toward him, refusing to be underestimated. A moment later, the monster slowly collapsed. What had happened was that Suzuki had already severed both of its arms and both of its legs. Tia could only watch in amazement. As the limbless monster fell helplessly to the ground, she could hardly believe what she had witnessed. It became obvious to her that the masked man was incredibly strong. Suzuki immediately demanded to know where Takatsuki Kuji and Mitsuki were, forcing the monster to answer. He pressed his foot down harder onto the monster, making it growl in pain. The monster admitted that the two of them were currently fighting alongside its comrades. It explained that anyone splashed with the blood of those praying mantis demons would unconsciously be drawn toward a certain location. The demon laughed, wondering whether Suzuki actually believed he could save them. It claimed that doing so was impossible because those two were weaker than he was. Before it could continue speaking, Suzuki drove his foot down even harder, crushing the monster's head and killing it instantly. Suzuki then asked Tia whether she could still stand. She replied that she somehow could. He remarked that the monster had seemed ready to say something more, but it no longer mattered. Their next task was to defeat its companion as well. Suzuki quietly cursed to himself, wondering where the important location the monster had mentioned actually was. He realized just how rusty he had become. Although he could vaguely sense where they were, he could not determine their exact location. Tia assured him that it was not a problem because she could locate them. Hearing that, Suzuki immediately asked her to guide him along the shortest route to Takatsuki and Mitsuki. He intended to rescue Takatsuki and Miki without delay. Tia's eyes lit up. She bowed deeply and thanked him. Suzuki quietly realized that Mitsuki was exactly the kind of person he had expected her to be. Before they could leave, Tia called out to him once more. She gently grabbed his shirt, stopping him, and pleaded with him to tell her his real name. She admitted that she would feel ashamed if she could not even know the true name of the person who had saved her life. Suzuki asked her to let go because she was stretching his clothes. He promised that he would tell her after everything was over. Just then, something fluttered through the air. Suzuki noticed it, while Tia suddenly flinched. He realized that it was a shiki. Tia explained that a shiki was a magical item that could be attached to something and controlled remotely. Suzuki asked what that meant. Tia explained that it meant someone else had been controlling that demon from somewhere else. Meanwhile, the other team was facing the second monster. Yuto and the creature exchanged relentless attacks, with both refusing to back down. The monster managed to graze Yuto and leave a wound, while Takatsuki landed a kick at the same moment he was struck in the face by the demon. Both of them stepped back for a brief moment. Yuto called out to Daitsuki, and he assured her that he was all right. The demon wore a grin as Takatsuki wondered what kind of demon it was. Yuto had never expected such a powerful one to appear. She immediately asked whether Tia and Cabbage were safe, reminding Takatsuki that they had to return to those two as quickly as possible. Takatsuki then thought about Sasuke. He called out to Yuto and told her that he would distract the demon so she could head back first. Yuto questioned what he was talking about before insisting that she would be the one to distract it instead, telling him to stay back. Yuto drew her sword and charged straight toward the demon. Takatsuki immediately tried to stop her, but before he could, Sasuke had already rushed past him. In an instant, Sasuke moved behind them, sped past Takatsuki, reached Yuto, and pulled her back. Without slowing down, he delivered a powerful strike to the demon. The impact instantly destroyed the monster, causing it to dissolve into the air as if it had never been there. Yuto froze in shock, unable to understand why Sasuke was there. Takatsuki could hardly believe what he had just witnessed, realizing that Sasuke had defeated the demon in a single strike. It only confirmed what he had always thought, that Sasuke was incredible, and he praised him as the strongest. Sasuke brushed it off by remarking that Takatsuki really talked like an elementary school kid. Tia then called out to Yuto as she hurried over and checked whether she was alright. Yuto assured her that she was fine. Tia expressed her relief, saying it was all thanks to Teru, and Yuto agreed. A voice then congratulated the group for their work. Tsukumura, Shishido, and Kazumi arrived together, with Tsukumura thanking everyone for their hard work and announcing that today's mission was finally over. She also praised Sasuke for a job well done, saying that he truly seemed to be every bit as capable as she had heard. Sasuke became embarrassed and quietly thanked her. Behind Tsukumura, Kazumi remained staring at Sasuke. The attention made him uneasy, so he quickly came up with an excuse that he needed to head home because he had to wake up early for his part-time job, and he immediately ran off. Yuto reacted in confusion, wondering what was wrong with him. Takatsuki commented that defeating everyone with overwhelming power while speaking only when necessary was exactly his ideal image of a magician. Shishido then pointed out that this was despite Sasuke choosing to wear that strange mask. As Sasuke hurried away, he thought that he had almost blown his cover. He convinced himself that acting that way should be enough to stay safe, believing everything had gone well. Meanwhile, Kazumi remained behind, quietly feeling disappointed. Back at the students' gathering place, Tia announced that the mission report was complete. She summarized that they had defeated a total of 7 demons during the operation. Tsukumura praised everyone once again, saying they had done an excellent job and that she was proud to be the teacher of such students. Tia explained that everything had been possible because of Teru. Without him, the outcome could have been very different. He had immediately seen through the demon's disguise and even managed to take the initiative against it, proving that his abilities were genuine. Yuto also recalled that the demon had appeared in front of Takatsuki while disguised as Tia. She admitted that if the creature had actually been capable of thinking more carefully, she probably would not have been able to see through the disguise. She then joked that the imitation had been rude because the real Tia was much cuter and even had a pleasant floral scent. Tia replied that she was indeed quite amazing herself, though she also felt it would be better if people did not go around identifying others by their smell. Shishido then added that Cabbage was completely incapable of using any magic besides body strengthening, making him quite an unusual person. Tsukumura acknowledged the information and decided that she would thank Teru later. She then shifted everyone's attention to their next hunt. She explained that they had already defeated almost every demon found in the town, leaving only one remaining on the mountaintop. That final demon was a massive one. Tia agreed, saying that she had sensed it as well. From what she could tell, it was larger than any demon she had encountered before. The group quietly listened as Tsukumura continued. She explained that the demon did not seem to be moving from its current location, but if it ever descended into the town, the destruction it could cause would be tremendous. Because of that, all of them would head out tomorrow night to defeat it. That battle would become their final mission in the town. Turning to Kazumi, Tsukumura reminded Shikigami that she surely would not want her hometown to be destroyed, urging her to pull herself together. Kazumi simply acknowledged her words. Shishido commented that their final mission would be a major one. Yuto became excited, feeling that this was exactly the kind of challenge she enjoyed. Tia thought about the enormous demon, believing it would be far stronger than the monkey demon they had fought before. She quietly wondered whether they could actually win. Tsukumura then revealed that they would carry out the mission without the masked man. The announcement left everyone stunned. Tia was about to object, but Takatsuki spoke first. He argued that if they truly wanted the mission to succeed without fail, then Sasuke's cooperation was more than necessary. Tsukumura explained that there was a reason behind the decision, but it was better if they did not know the details. She only stated that his background could potentially affect their future careers. Tia and Takatsuki found it difficult to accept her explanation. Yuto noticed how much both of them admired Cabbage, but she reminded them that this was supposed to be a practical lesson, so they should simply follow their teacher's instructions. Takatsuki became irritated, while Tia remained silent and did not continue arguing. Yuto then asked Kazumi whether she had already tried asking her parents for help. Kazumi apologized and explained that both her father and mother were currently overseas, while her grandfather had also returned to his own country. Takatsuki remarked that, just as he expected, the timing could not have been worse. Shishido laughed lightly and told Kazumi not to think so negatively because everything would be alright. He encouraged everyone by saying that if they all worked together, they would find a way to overcome it. Tsukimura called his attention and agreed with his words. She reminded everyone that they had not been completely helpless during their battle against the monkey demon. Vermilion had managed to stop its barrier and soul-bind spell, even if it had only been for a few seconds. Takatsuki and Yuto had also been able to stand their ground during the fight, with Shishido wielding his divine sword and Shikigami fighting alongside her divine beast. They would be able to defeat the demon as long as everyone worked together. On top of that, Tsukimura herself would also be joining the mission. She assured everyone that there was no reason to worry. They were all her proud students, and she believed they would undoubtedly achieve remarkable results together. Everyone showed different reactions to the discussion, and Tsukimura announced that they were dismissed for the day. She reminded them that their operation would begin tomorrow at midnight and warned them not to be late. Shishido confidently declared that if anything happened, he would protect everyone. Yuto immediately reacted, wondering what he was talking about and calling him an idiot. Just then someone called out to Tia. It was Tsukimura, asking if she could stay behind for a moment because there was something she wanted to ask. Tia agreed and remained behind. She asked what it was about, and Tsukimura explained that it concerned the monkey demon they had fought. It had seemed to be a rather unusual individual. She wanted to know if there had been anything strange about it besides its mimicry ability, as it might be connected to the large Type 1 demon. Tia answered that there had been nothing unusual beyond that. The two quietly looked at each other for a brief moment before Tsukimura concluded that she understood and apologized for taking up her time. Tia excused herself and left the room. Watching her leave, Tsukimura observed that although Tia did not speak much, she wore her emotions openly and was clearly worried about her future. Meanwhile, Suzuki was at his part-time job, struggling to carry several boxes because his muscles were still aching from the side effects of using his magic. Someone called out to him, and it was Sasamine. She asked whether he was alright and if he had been injured anywhere. Suzuki assured her that he was fine and apologized. Sasamine reached out her hand, noticing that his hands were surprisingly large. Suzuki quietly wondered if he had come across as creepy. Sasamine then suggested that if he was not feeling well, he should leave work early and speak with the store owner about it. Suzuki insisted that he was really fine and that it was only muscle pain. Without listening any further, Sasamine grabbed him and started leading him away, telling him that it was alright and that he simply needed to talk to the owner. She reminded him that she knew he always worked hard, but he should not push himself when he was not feeling well. Suzuki followed after her. To him, leaving work early because of nothing more than sore muscles felt pathetic for someone who had once been a hero. He also realized that he needed to continue training his body because he never knew when another demon might appear. After returning home, he announced that he was back. His grandmother welcomed him and wondered why he had come home so early. Suzuki explained that he had been told to leave work early and that it was nothing serious, only muscle pain. His grandmother replied that it must have been difficult, but Suzuki assured her that it would disappear after he got some sleep. She then mentioned that someone had come to visit him. Surprised, Suzuki immediately wondered if it was perhaps a polite, handsome man with suntanned skin like a sailor, or maybe a cool female teacher who certain strange people would probably enjoy being stepped on by. His grandmother laughed at the unusual list before telling him that it was neither of them. Instead, it was Kazumi, who was waiting for him in his room. Hearing that answer left Suzuki completely stunned. Kazumi apologized to Suzuki for suddenly coming to his house. There was something she absolutely needed to ask him, and before she realized it, she had already come. Suzuki simply accepted it. He remembered that the last time Kazumi had been inside his room was when they were both little kids. As she looked at him, she noticed the way he was walking and asked if he was alright. Suzuki assured her that he was fine and explained that he was only dealing with muscle pain. Kazumi then wondered if it was because of their battle against the demons the day before. Her question caught Suzuki off guard, and he asked if she had known about it all along. Kazumi admitted that she had known from the very beginning. Hearing that left Suzuki deeply unsettled as he realized that she had truly known everything. Kazumi admitted that she had been shocked. After losing track of him for 4.5 years, he had suddenly returned as a magician. She wanted to know why he had kept it a secret from her, especially since she herself was still a Shikigami. Her family was responsible for protecting and managing the spirit veins of that land, and she believed she could have helped him somehow. Suzuki explained that, until recently, he had never even known that there were people using magic on Earth. He admitted that he had also been curious about the spirit veins. Because of that, he had never realized that Kazumi was a magician either. Since magic was hidden from ordinary people, he assumed she probably did not want him to know about it, so he chose to stay quiet. Kazumi then asked if that was the reason he had disguised himself and acted like an entirely different person. Suzuki admitted that it was true and apologized. Kazumi found it hard to believe, but Suzuki explained that everything had happened on the spur of the moment and that he had simply said whatever came to mind to hide his identity. Kazumi quietly accepted his explanation. Kazumi then asked where he had been during those 4.5 years and what he had been doing all that time. She wanted to know how he had learned magic under those circumstances. Suzuki hesitated. He remembered being summoned by someone who had begged him to defeat the Demon King and save another world, where he eventually became a hero. Until now, however, nobody had ever believed the unbelievable experiences he had gone through. The police had dismissed his story, and even job interviews always ended with rejection. But Kazumi was a fellow magician. She fought demons herself, and she might have experienced equally strange things. He convinced himself that she would surely take his story seriously and believe every word. Suzuki took a deep breath and decided that he would tell her everything. Kazumi was surprised that he was actually willing to do so, and she became genuinely happy because she had wanted to know the truth for a long time. Suzuki apologized for making her worry, and Kazumi accepted the apology. Suzuki then began explaining that in truth he had been transported to another world 4.5 years ago. There, he had become a hero after being summoned by a princess. Along the way, he met trusted companions, while his master put him through incredibly harsh and demanding training. His master had been some kind of priest, and defeating the Demon King had been far more difficult than he could have imagined. Because of that victory, he had been treated as a true hero everywhere he went. He had become one of those legendary figures remembered throughout history. His face and name had even been printed in textbooks, and he had become the main character of countless picture books. He wished he could have shown all of it to Kazumi, but when he returned to Earth, he came back with absolutely nothing. Before Suzuki could continue, Kazumi stopped him. Confused, he wondered what was wrong because he still had so much more to tell her. Kazumi could no longer hold back her frustration. She angrily rejected everything he had just said, making it clear that she had not come there to listen to such nonsense. Suzuki was stunned by her sudden reaction and could not understand what had changed. Kazumi demanded to know why he was lying to her like that. Suzuki tried to explain himself, but she cut him off before he could continue. During the 4.5 years that he had disappeared, countless people had been desperately worried about him. His family, his friends, and especially her had searched for him without giving up. She had even relied on magic at times in hopes of finding him. Despite all those efforts, she had never been able to discover where he was. Eventually, she no longer knew what else she could do. She spent every day worrying about whether he was safe, and the fear continued to grow until she almost could not bear it anymore. Tears began running down her face as she questioned whether he realized how selfish it had been to disappear without saying a single word to anyone before suddenly returning. She then wondered if he was once again trying to fool her with nothing more than another unbelievable excuse. Suzuki finally realized what had happened. Everyone had happily welcomed him back, but he understood that before that moment, they had all gone through painful times because of his disappearance. He truly had been transported to another world and had become a hero there, but to everyone else, he simply looked like someone who had selfishly disappeared without a word and then suddenly returned. Until now, he had failed to notice something so obvious. Kazumi had been right. Kazumi had genuinely been happy when she learned that he had returned. At first, knowing that he was alive and unharmed had been enough for her. However, she could not ignore the fact that he had suddenly become capable of using magic. That was why she had decided to come and speak with him properly. Instead, she felt that he was still trying to fool her. Suzuki insisted that she was mistaken. He argued that he had never lied to her and that he really had been summoned to another world. He then asked whether magic could also summon people, believing that if magic existed, then it should not be impossible for someone to be transported to another world through it. Kazumi immediately rejected that idea, explaining that humans were the one type of being that could not be summoned. Kazumi went on to explain that humans could never be summoned, and that the kind of different worlds Suzuki described did not even exist. To her, that was simply common knowledge, and since Suzuki was now a magician, she believed he should at least know that much. Suzuki cursed to himself, wondering if it was really that impossible. Yet he knew what had happened to him was real. He truly had been summoned to another world. Even though both worlds had magicians and magic, their understanding of those things was completely different. He also realized that he knew almost nothing about the magical common sense of Earth. No matter how honestly he explained everything, Kazumi would never be convinced. The thought left Suzuki feeling cornered as he desperately searched for a way out. He slowly stood up, causing Kazumi to ask what he was doing. Suzuki apologized and asked her to simply forget everything he had told her that day. He decided that it would be easier if everyone believed he had simply run away for no particular reason before eventually deciding to come back. He asked if that explanation would satisfy her. In his mind, it was the only choice left. He believed that saying anything more would only make the situation worse. Kazumi questioned what he was thinking, wondering if he realized how disrespectful that answer was to everyone who had spent years worrying about him. Sasuke responded that he had already explained himself, but Kazumi made it clear that repeating those words would never convince her. She believed that he was caught up in something serious. If that was true, she pleaded with him to stop making excuses and speak honestly with her. She wanted to become someone he could rely on and support him through whatever he was facing. Sasuke quietly refused. Since he had not truly been on Earth during those 4.5 years, he knew he could never properly explain what had happened. It was a problem he had to solve by himself. Because of that, he insisted that it had nothing to do with Kazumi. Sasuke apologized for saying those words, but Kazumi accepted them with quiet disappointment. If it truly had nothing to do with her, then she wondered if he simply saw her as someone who no longer mattered in his life. Sasuke immediately panicked and denied that he had meant it that way, but Kazumi stopped him. After everything that had happened, she realized that he simply did not want to tell her anything. She decided that she would leave, but Sasuke quickly stopped her. Kazumi looked at him and admitted that his behavior felt unnatural. She could not understand why he was so unwilling to tell her the truth. A troubling thought then crossed her mind. She wondered if, during those 4.5 years, he had done something that he could never reveal to anyone else. Hearing that accusation left Sasuke visibly offended as he questioned what she meant by it. Kazumi explained that this behavior was nothing like Sasuke. She could not believe he would resort to lying just to distance himself from the people around him. Because of that, she started wondering if he had done something during those 4.5 years that she had never imagined. She even began thinking of examples of terrible things he might have done during that time. Hearing that, Sasuke finally lost his temper and demanded to know what she believed he had done. He argued that he had wanted to return all along. He had wanted to see not only his family, but Kazumi as well. Kazumi refused to accept those words. She insisted that he should stop lying to her and finally tell her the truth. Unable to hold back, Sasuke grabbed her and desperately repeated that he really had been summoned to another world. At that moment, Sasuke realized how hopeless the situation had become. To Kazumi, the truth he kept trying to tell was nothing more than another lie. Kazumi told him to let go because he was hurting her. In her eyes, he no longer looked anything like a hero. Instead, he appeared to be nothing more than someone making unbelievable claims. Sasuke slowly released his grip. Kazumi quietly concluded that, just as she had expected, he had no intention of telling her anything she could believe. Because of that, she decided that this would be the last time they would ever meet like this. Before leaving, she remembered one final thing she had come to tell him. Sasuke asked what it was, and Kazumi informed him that the final battle would take place that very night. Their target would be the great demon hiding on the mountaintop, but the school had not approved his participation. The news caught Sasuke by surprise. Kazumi added that everyone would be able to fight just fine without him because Miss Tsukumura believed the same. After saying everything she needed to, she quietly left. As Kazumi walked home through the rain, tears once again ran down her face, and she quietly called herself an idiot. From his room, Sasuke watched her through the window while cursing himself. He wondered who could possibly believe someone who never properly faced others and only spoke words that sounded like lies. Even so, out of everyone, the one person he had truly wanted to believe him had always been Kazumi. Overwhelmed by everything that had happened, he rolled onto his bed and eventually fell asleep. Sometime later, his phone suddenly began ringing. Sasuke woke up in confusion, wondering when he had fallen asleep. Looking around, he realized it was already midnight. Curious about who would be calling at such an hour, he checked the phone and saw Sasamine's name. Wondering why she would contact him so late, he answered the call. The person on the other end asked if he was Sasuke. He questioned who was calling, and the caller responded by asking if he had not checked the caller ID, claiming to be Sasamine. Sasuke immediately became suspicious. He pointed out that the real Sasamine would never speak in such a rough and vulgar manner. The caller sarcastically wondered if he had started treating Miko like some kind of goddess. The way the person spoke reminded Sasuke of a villain, making him suspect that whoever it was might know Sasamine personally. Even at that hour, dealing with such nonsense felt exhausting. Sasuke admitted that he had no idea who the caller really was, then asked if they even realized what time it was. If it was just some kind of prank, he intended to hang up. Before he could do so, the caller quickly stopped him, telling him not to be so hasty while referring to him as a hero. That single word made Sasuke freeze. The caller brushed it aside, saying there was no time for unnecessary conversation and that the explanation would be brief. The caller warned him that the group currently carrying out the demon hunt was in danger. The signals coming from the mountaintop had become weak, and the caller believed the demons were probably not responsible for it. Suzuki demanded to know what the caller was talking about and once again asked who they really were. At the same time, he could not understand why someone on Earth was calling him a hero. The caller continued, insisting that something had definitely happened on the mountaintop. On top of that, someone was jamming their signal, leaving the caller completely unaware of what was happening there. After revealing everything they knew, the caller stated that doing so would settle their debt and that they still owed the main body. The call abruptly ended. Suzuki immediately tried calling back. At the same time, a cold thought crossed his mind that if whoever was behind this dared to lay another hand on Miko, they would pay for it with their life. On the mountain, Sukimura noticed that the weather had become unusually stormy and urged everyone to climb to the summit so they could finally bring the demon hunt to an end. As thunder rumbled through the sky, Yuta turned to Kazumi, wondering if something had happened. Ever since Kazumi had returned from Cabbage's house, she had looked unusually downcast. Kazumi apologized and insisted that nothing had happened, that everything was fine. Even so, the response failed to convince anyone. Meanwhile, Takatsuki attached something to a nearby tree and asked if the placement was correct. Tia confirmed that it was fine, explaining that it was a talisman meant to keep ordinary people away. Once every talisman had been placed, only their group would remain on the mountain. Takatsuki agreed and continued the task. Yuta then called out to them, wondering if everything would really be alright when both Takatsuki and Tia also looked so gloomy. She suspected that they were still having a hard time accepting that Cabbage had not been allowed to participate. At that moment, Shishido stepped forward and confidently reassured everyone that he would protect them and that there was nothing to worry about. His confidence caught Yuto by surprise, but Yuto simply accepted it. The group was reminded that they were almost finished placing the talismans, and everyone was told to pull themselves together. They all acknowledged the reminder. Sukimura then announced that they had reached the summit and continued walking. She asked Tia whether she could sense anything nearby. Tia replied that she could feel something, but for some reason she could not determine its exact location. It felt as though some unknown power was interfering with her senses. Without warning, the ground suddenly began to shake before large cracks spread across the earth. Everyone quickly realized that whatever was coming was approaching from behind them. A massive monster burst out from beneath the ground, forcing everyone to scatter in different directions. Yuto stared at the enormous creature in amazement, while Takatsuki noted that the previous monster had only been a lizard. Shishido simply laughed without concern as he confidently drew his sword. Kazumi immediately told everyone to get down. Since their opponent was so enormous, the best approach was to let it face someone of equal size. She began casting a series of spells before summoning the divine beast, Jinru. Trusting the battle to Jinru, she stepped back as Jinru calmly accepted the task and told her to stay behind. Jinru slowly advanced toward the giant lizard before suddenly lunging forward. The two enormous beings collided with tremendous force. Shishido praised the summon, while Tia recognized Jinru as the strongest summon among the Shikigami. Kazumi remained focused on the battle as both monsters pushed against each other without giving way. Takatsuki observed that their strength appeared perfectly balanced. Seeing the opening, Yuto leaped high above the monster, preparing to strike. After watching Jinru successfully halt the creature's movements, Yuto believed the opportunity had arrived. Locking onto the monster's head, Yuto rushed forward to deliver the attack. However, in the blink of an eye, the massive lizard suddenly dashed away with unbelievable speed, effortlessly avoiding the strike. The sight left Yuto stunned, unable to understand how a creature of that size could move so incredibly fast. Shishido immediately declared that he would pierce straight through it and launched a powerful slash at the giant lizard. At the same time, Takatsuki soared overhead and unleashed a barrage of fireballs, triggering one explosion after another across the battlefield. After their attacks, the two briefly struck confident poses. Once the smoke and flames cleared, the giant lizard emerged completely unharmed, with only a few shallow scratches visible across its scales. Yuto could hardly believe that such powerful attacks had caused so little damage. Tia realized that their magic somehow was not reaching the monster properly. Takatsuki observed that the creature's incredibly tough scales, combined with its overwhelming mobility, placed it on an entirely different level from every enemy they had faced before. Shishido then reflected that perhaps he had been a little too disrespectful towards such an opponent. Deciding it was finally time to become serious, he resolved to stop holding back and prepared to draw the divine sword. Kazumi looked toward the battlefield while Tia wondered what they were supposed to do next. Neither the divine beast's attacks nor their high-level fire magic had been able to defeat the monster. Her sealing technique would not make any difference either. They were missing something decisive that could bring the battle to an end. If things continued like this, defeat was only a matter of time. Tsukimura gently patted Tia on the head before stepping forward. She observed that the monster's scales were unusually tough and decided to blow them away with her own arts. Tia tried to stop her, but Tsukimura warned everyone to stay back. If they came any closer, they would only lose their lives. She placed one hand on the ground, and the earth immediately began to rumble. Large cracks spread across the ground before an overwhelming force erupted beneath the giant lizard, launching the massive creature high into the air where it remained suspended. Seeing the opportunity, Tsukimura realized that the monster could no longer properly control its body while airborne. The trembling ground then rose and shaped itself into enormous drills that shot upward and struck the monster in midair. One drill after another continued tearing into its body with relentless force. Kazumi watched in amazement at the overwhelming power being unleashed. Eventually, the giant lizard crashed back onto the ground. As the dust slowly settled, everyone saw that a massive wound had been carved into its body. However, Kazumi was suddenly shocked when the monster's flesh began to regenerate before their eyes. Within moments, its injuries completely disappeared, and the giant lizard stood up once again as though nothing had happened. Yuto could not understand how they were supposed to kill such a monster. Tia was equally stunned that it could even heal itself. Without losing focus, Tsukimura created another series of drill-shaped projectiles and told everyone not to become impatient. She intended to tear away the monster's armor once more. Once its scales had been broken again, everyone else would bombard it with their strongest magic, and that should finally finish it. The group understood the plan. It was as if every attack until now had been completely ineffective. Once Tsukimura shattered the demon's scales again, it would become their turn to unleash everything they had. They spread out and surrounded the giant monster from every direction, preparing for the next assault. Before anyone could act, the giant lizard suddenly slithered across the ground. Tsukimura noticed the movement immediately, became alert, and warned everyone to stay back. The monster suddenly shot out its long tongue toward Tsukimura, wrapping tightly around her body and trapping her. Panic spread through the group as everyone rushed forward, trying to rescue her while she was being dragged away. Even as they moved to help, Tsukimura ordered them to stay where they were. The giant lizard slowly opened its enormous jaws before swallowing Tsukimura whole. The rest of the group could only watch as their leader met a gruesome end. They heard the monster chewing, and for a brief moment, one of Tsukimura's hands remained hanging from its mouth before disappearing completely. After finishing its meal, the giant lizard slowly turned its gaze toward the remaining members of the group. Everyone was overwhelmed with disbelief and grief after losing their teacher, Tsukimura. Kazumi fought the giant lizard while tears streamed down her face, unable to hold back her sorrow. At the same time, Jean was consumed by anger, repeatedly slashing at the giant lizard without restraint. Kazumi desperately tried to stop him, urging him to endure because if Jean also fell, everything would truly come to an end. Yuto began moving across the battlefield and noticed that the tornado surrounding her blade was slowly coming apart. She could not help but think of herself as pathetic, but she pushed those thoughts aside and forced herself to focus on the enemy. The giant lizard suddenly turned its attention toward her. Its incredible speed caught her by surprise as it closed the distance in an instant and launched an attack. She reacted just in time, countering the strike and slashing its hand, barely avoiding being crushed into the ground. The giant lizard let out a powerful roar, followed by a heavy impact. Yuto immediately realized it was a shockwave. The force sent her flying through the air, but Takatsuki managed to catch her before she hit the ground. She admitted that they could not keep fighting like this anymore because they would not be able to hold on much longer. Takatsuki understood her concern, but he could not bring himself to let something like that rampage through the city. He knew he would never forgive himself if that happened. Kazumi realized that the giant lizard possessed both incredible defense and overwhelming mobility. On top of that, it never exposed an opening, leaving her wondering how they were supposed to defeat such a monster on their own. The giant lizard released another deafening scream. Jinri immediately told everyone to stay behind him and not move from his back. At that moment, Tia stepped forward. Kazumi quickly tried to stop her, knowing how dangerous it was, but Tia remained calm, believing that even something as small as stepping on a single pebble could make someone fall. She activated Soul Bind beneath the giant lizard's feet, causing the massive creature to lose its footing the moment the spell took effect. Seeing the opening, Kazumi gave Jinri the signal. Jinri instantly dashed forward, slammed the giant lizard into the ground, and followed with a powerful slash that sent the enormous creature rolling across the battlefield. However, the deep wound from the attack healed almost immediately. Jinri recognized that the giant lizard had regenerated once again. Tia quickly checked on Kazumi, and Kazumi confirmed that she was fine. Watching the wound disappear so quickly, Yuto could only think about how unfair such instant recovery was. Takatsuki explained that regenerative abilities like that were not especially rare. There were even human wizards who were known as immortal because of similar powers. The only way to defeat such an enemy was to deal more damage than its defenses could withstand and attack faster than it could regenerate, exactly as Miss Tsukimura had been trying to do. After hearing those words, Yuto realized that only one person among them was capable of accomplishing that at this moment. Then bolts of lightning began spreading across the battlefield. The power belonged to Shishido. Tia asked how much longer he needed, and Shishido indicated that they only had to hold on a little longer. The divine sword granted its wielder overwhelming power for a brief period, but the price was steep. Summoning it required several minutes, consumed 80% of the user's magical power, and left Shishido completely defenseless throughout the entire process. Even so, they believed everything would be fine as long as Jin remained on the front line. He could buy enough time for Shishido to complete the summoning. As long as the divine sword could be brought forth, they still had a chance to defeat the giant lizard. The giant lizard slowly raised its head. Kazumi immediately noticed the movement and warned everyone to get away. A moment later, the giant lizard unleashed a deafening scream that made their ears bleed. It was followed by an enormous shockwave rushing toward them. This one was far greater than the previous attack, so powerful that it could not even be compared to the earlier shockwave. Shishido assured Tia that he was fine and urged her to run without him. Tia refused to leave his side. At that moment, a massive shield rose from the ground and collided with the incoming shockwave, blocking its advance. Tia cried out as she struggled with all her strength to keep the shield standing. Kazumi recognized how well the shield had been made and realized it was far beyond what a student should normally be capable of creating. Even so, cracks slowly began spreading across the shield. At the same time, wounds started appearing on Tia's arm as she continued enduring the tremendous pressure. The shield was unable to withstand the overwhelming force of the shockwave. More cracks spread across its surface while Tia continued holding it together with the last of her strength. Before long, she realized the shield was about to collapse. Jin re-acknowledged her effort and decided that she had done enough. He rushed forward and used his own body to protect Tia from the shockwave just as the shield finally shattered. The full impact struck Jinri, sending him flying. Kazumi could only watch in horror as he was thrown away. The moment he hit the ground, she rushed to his side and immediately tried to heal him. However, Jinri stopped her, knowing that her magical power was already running dangerously low. Instead, he wanted her to take everyone else and quietly escape. As Kazumi held him in her arms, his presence gradually faded away until he completely disappeared. The giant lizard stomped forward, advancing once again while everyone stood frozen, unable to decide what to do next. They had lost the people who had been protecting and supporting them. The giant lizard turned its gaze toward Tatsuki. He prepared himself to face the monster, ready to confront it alone. The giant lizard immediately charged toward him. Tia called out to him, believing they had no choice left but to retreat. Before the monster could even reach Takatsuki, Shishido suddenly appeared and struck it with the divine sword. Lightning burst across the battlefield together with the swing of his blade. After landing, he apologized for arriving a little later than planned. The giant lizard quickly retaliated, swinging one of its claws at Shishido. However, Shishido had already sensed the attack. He countered with a powerful slash that severely wounded the giant lizard's claw. Noticing how unexpectedly fragile it was, he immediately followed with a relentless series of strikes, each slash accompanied by crackling lightning. The others watched in amazement as the power of one of the greatest divine swords in existence unfolded before them. It was the power that guided its wielder along the path to kingship. The king's sword, Excalibur. Shishido looked at the giant lizard and recognized that it had become far too reckless. He had no intention of allowing the monster to meet an easy end. As Shishido drew his sword, he knew that this would be the giant lizard's end. The giant lizard suddenly collapsed onto the ground without moving, but cracks soon began spreading across its back. With the last of its strength, it released one final roar as fragments from its back burst outward in every direction. Fortunately, Shishido protected himself by raising a barrier. He realized that the monster still had that much power left, but at last, its back had become exposed. Takatsuki immediately rushed forward and leaped onto the giant lizard. He aimed his attack directly at its exposed back, determined to burn it from the inside. Flames gathered around his hands before he released them onto the giant lizard, setting its body ablaze. Even so, the giant lizard remained alive and unleashed another shockwave. Takatsuki realized that another shockwave had been released, while Shishido remained calm, recognizing that the monster's power had weakened significantly. Yudo then charged forward and slipped beneath the giant lizard. She steadied herself, recognizing that the monster had become careless. Using Storm Point, she drove her attack directly into the giant lizard. The creature let out a painful scream as the strike landed. Just as she had expected, the joints along its back were not protected by armor. Blood poured over her as she struck its exposed body, and she realized that the unprotected flesh beneath its armor was surprisingly soft. The giant lizard collapsed once again. Watching from above, Shishido knew that this time it was truly over. He raised his sword, determined to pour everything he had into one final attack. As he descended, he unleashed a powerful slash across the giant lizard. Lightning spread around the monster's body with the force of the strike. When the attack was finished, the giant lizard had been completely cut in half. Relief spread across the group as the battle finally came to an end. The divine sword slowly began breaking apart into countless fragments until it completely disappeared from Shishido's hand. The divine sword had returned. Yudo recognized that the battle was finally over, and Shishido confirmed that they had won. Shishido looked toward Yudo with a grateful expression, knowing that the victory had been possible because of her. Takatsuki reflected on how powerful that monster had been and wondered if he would have to face enemies like that after graduating. The thought made him realize that the future would not be easy, and he questioned whether he would truly be capable of becoming the next head of the Takatsuki family. Yudo noticed him staring into the distance. He brushed it aside, deciding that for now, he simply wanted to sit down and rest. Tia remained silent for a while. Kazumi noticed her unusual behavior and became concerned. She remembered seeing Tia approach the monster and wondered if there had been something strange about that demon. Tia gave no response, making Kazumi wonder if she could no longer hear her. Then Kazumi noticed that Tia had picked something up. The sight immediately reminded her of a young Sasuke. Her eyes widened as she questioned why the memory of the first time she met Sasuke had suddenly returned to her at that moment. Even so, she believed that they had managed to overcome the crisis. She knew she needed to report everything that had happened to the academy, including the death of Miss Tsukamura. As those thoughts crossed her mind, she also found herself wondering what Sasuke was doing at that very moment. She realized that if she had died in that battle, she would never have seen him again, spoken with him again, gone anywhere with him again, or been able to tell him how she truly felt. That thought filled her with sadness, leaving her wondering why things had ended with the two of them arguing. Most of what Sasuke had told her had been difficult for her to believe. Even so, she could tell that he had been carrying an incredibly heavy burden. Looking back, she could not help but regret that she had responded to him with such harsh words. She even found herself apologizing to those who might hate her because of it, while questioning what she had really been trying to accomplish by acting that way. She questioned herself, wondering if what she truly wanted was to see Sasuke again lying inside a coffin, covered in injuries and dressed in torn clothes. She immediately knew that was not what she wanted. Instead, she quietly wished for Sasuke to return safely. Seeing that he was still as energetic as he had always been should have been enough for her. More than anything, she wanted to see Sasuke again. She wanted to meet him one more time. She wanted to speak with him again, even if it was only once more. At that moment, Tia suddenly froze in shock. Kazumi noticed her reaction and became concerned. Tia had discovered a glowing object. It was a shiki. Kazumi was left both shocked and confused. At the same time, Shishido sensed another presence and turned his attention toward it. Standing there was a mysterious figure wearing a traditional Somen mask. Shishido immediately questioned the stranger's identity and wondered how someone had managed to enter the mountain. The figure certainly did not appear to be reinforcements sent by Alteria. Without warning, Shishido was suddenly struck and sent flying. Takatsuki immediately prepared himself for battle. Deep marks from the attack were carved across Shishido's body, and he lost consciousness. Everyone was stunned by what had just happened. Yudo quickly moved behind the masked figure and attempted to deliver a strike. However, the masked individual stopped her attack with nothing but a bare hand. The tremendous force behind that single block shattered Yudo's sword. The masked figure then delivered a powerful punch that sent her crashing to the ground. Takatsuki immediately followed up with an attack from behind, but to his surprise, the masked figure remained completely unharmed, as if his strike had done no damage at all. The masked figure answered with a powerful kick. Takatsuki managed to block the first attack and successfully dodged the next kick. Tia immediately urged him to run away. It was already too late. A heavy punch struck Takatsuki in the face, sending him crashing to the ground as well. The masked figure slowly began walking toward the only ones still standing, Tia and Kazumi. Kazumi trembled as the stranger drew closer. Tia immediately activated Soulbind, trying to stop the masked figure from approaching. Kazumi called out to her, but Tia focused only on telling Kazumi to run away. The Soulbind managed to restrain the masked figure for only a brief moment before it suddenly exploded apart. Tia stumbled from the backlash, and Kazumi rushed to her side. Tia admitted that she had completely exhausted all of her magical energy and realized that she had become nothing more than a burden. She desperately wanted Kazumi to escape on her own. The masked figure brushed aside the remaining traces of Soulbind with ease. Kazumi demanded to know who the masked stranger really was while desperately begging the figure not to come any closer and to stay away. At the same time, Tia urged Kazumi to stop. Tia then asked the mysterious figure to at least reveal her face, referring to the masked individual as a woman. The moment Kazumi heard Tia address the masked figure as Miss, she was left both shocked and confused. The masked figure slowly reached up and removed the Somen mask. The person beneath it was Miss Tsukamura all along. She reflected that Tia had always been the smartest among them and admitted that she had forgotten that. She acknowledged Vermilion with praise, having expected nothing less from her student. As her identity was fully revealed, Miss Tsukamura's face carried a sinister expression. As the shocking truth about the enemy was finally revealed, Kazumi asked Miss Tsukamura why she had wanted that clarification. It had been confirmed that she had definitely been killed by the lizard demon. Tsukamura confirmed that Kazumi was correct. What everyone had witnessed was truly the death of a living person, yet she was standing there unharmed before them. Kazumi wondered if the person they had seen earlier had only been a dummy. Tia explained that it was the same mimicry magic the monkey demon had used before. A demon had copied the appearance of the teacher and had blended into the group from the very beginning. Kazumi was stunned after hearing that. Tia continued by explaining that the entire mission had been arranged solely by Miss Tsukamura. Kazumi should have remembered hearing how the demon that attacked her had disguised itself as Tatsuki. At that time, Toru or Sasuke had explained that creating such a perfect disguise required carefully observing the person being copied. Kazumi pointed out that Miss Tsukamura had always been someone who worked hard to understand her students deeply. She wondered if all of that effort had only been for the sake of casting the spell. Tia explained that the demon had also known they were students and had even used the same type of earth magic as Miss Tsukamura. She had simply transferred her own memories and magical power into the demon she controlled with the Shiki. By doing that, the demon became a pawn that could carry out her goals simply by being released into the wild. Kazumi asked if the demons that had appeared in this town were all pawns prepared by Miss Tsukamura. She realized that something like that would have been completely impossible without the cooperation of those demons. As Kazumi slowly began to understand that dark truth, Tia admitted that she had only ever heard about such things during lectures. Demonic arts was a forbidden technique that allowed someone to create demons at will. It was the most hated and strictly prohibited art within the association. From the very beginning, this mission had felt strange, forcing students to face demons that were overwhelmingly powerful. On top of that, it was not true that their request for reinforcements had been rejected. Miss Tsukamura had simply never contacted Alteria at all, and every report she had submitted had been nothing more than fabricated lies. Tia then questioned whether the true objective had been Shishido's divine sword. Miss Tsukamura confirmed that it was and wondered what had led Tia to reach that conclusion. Tia explained that it was nothing complicated. If Miss Tsukamura had been willing to throw away her entire career, then the reward had to be something as valuable as this, otherwise none of it would have made sense. Earlier, the monkey demon had intentionally spared Tia because it planned to use her as a hostage. It had believed that using someone else as a shield would force Shishido to obey without resisting. When that plan failed, the demon revealed its final trump card, which was the lizard demon. Tia pointed out that Miss Tsukamura had been controlling the lizard demon herself. She had hidden somewhere so she could devote her full concentration to controlling it, because if the demon accidentally killed Shishido, it would no longer be possible to summon the divine sword. The mimic let out a laugh before confirming that Tia's conclusion was mostly correct. The true target had indeed been the divine sword, or more precisely, retrieving the key. Tsukamura expressed that she felt truly proud to have such an outstanding student. Tia refused to accept those words after so much information had been deliberately revealed and questioned what Miss Tsukamura was really trying to accomplish. Instead of answering, Tsukamura turned the question back on Tia. Since Tia had already figured out so much, she wondered why none of it had been shared with her comrades. Tia remembered the moment she had realized something was wrong. When Sasuke found a shiki and handed it to her, she immediately began wondering whether the demon they had defeated had been controlled by someone. At that moment, the thought that it could be Miss Tsukamura crossed her mind. Even so, she could not accept that possibility. Tia believed that even if Miss Tsukamura had truly been involved, there had to be a good reason behind it. She convinced herself that perhaps everything was simply a form of special training. That had to be the answer. It had to be. Miss Tsukamura had always believed in her students and had always encouraged them with confidence. The only reason Tia had been able to stand beside Mitsuki and the others as a wizard was because of Miss Tsukamura's guidance. That was why she had chosen not to tell her comrades about her suspicions. Miss Tsukamura called out to her, refusing to believe that Tia was about to claim it had all been because of trust. Kazumi did not remain silent. She stepped forward and declared that there was nothing more shallow in this world than the word trust. In her eyes, the world was filled with nothing but lies and deception, no matter the time or place. She believed that people like Tia were not kind but simply naive. That was why she worried so much about Miss Tsukamura's future. Tia could not hold back her tears as she listened. Kazumi clenched her fist and pleaded for it to stop. She questioned what could possibly be wrong with believing in the person she respected more than anyone until the very end. She believed that struggling, worrying, and suffering over something, yet still choosing to believe, was only possible when someone held an incredible amount of trust in another person. Kazumi remembered that she herself had never been able to do that. She had not even tried. She admitted that she was not saying it was necessarily wrong. However, if someone felt no guilt over it, then that person must have nerves of steel. After all, The responsibility for the current critical situation rested entirely on that person's shoulders. Even so, she believed that trusting someone could never truly be called shallow. Kazumi's hand then began to glow. She placed it against Tia's head, transferring magical power into her. With that, Tia should at least be able to move again. Miss Tsukumura immediately understood that Tia had recovered enough strength to continue. After Kazumi healed Tia, Kazumi turned toward Miss Tsukumura and took up a fighting stance. Miss Tsukumura let out a quiet sigh and urged her to stop. She reminded Kazumi that she had taught her that surviving on the battlefield was never about reckless courage. She believed that if Kazumi quietly surrendered now, she would at least spare her life. Kazumi told Tia to run away as soon as she gave the signal. However, Tia refused. Before giving up, before surrendering, she believed there was still something she had to do. She wiped the tears from her eyes, stood back up, and chose to fight alongside Kazumi. Miss Tsukumura questioned whether the two of them were truly serious and reminded them that she was far stronger than the demon they had fought earlier. Kazumi remained unfazed and declared that even so, they would still fight. She had to return home safely today because there was someone she wanted to meet tomorrow. At that moment, Miss Tsukumura transformed into a demon, and the battle immediately began. She landed a powerful punch that struck both Tia and Kazumi. Before long, the two of them had been completely overwhelmed and were left badly beaten on the ground. Tsukumura remarked that the outcome had been disappointingly anticlimactic and wondered if Kazumi was finally satisfied. Kazumi turned her eyes toward Tia and saw that she had already lost consciousness. As Tsukumura began walking away, she told Kazumi to simply surrender. Deep down, she had no desire to hurt her unnecessarily because the only thing she needed was the divine sword. In response, Kazumi picked up a piece of rock and threw it at Tsukumura. Tsukumura immediately returned, grabbed Kazumi by the hair, lifted her into the air, and pointed out that she had always been the quiet and introverted type. She believed Kazumi should have simply run away instead. Kazumi quickly reached for her knife and cut off the section of hair Tsukumura was holding, allowing herself to break free. She then let the knife fall and unleashed a shockwave that exploded toward Tsukumura, forcing some distance between them. Kazumi collapsed onto the ground afterward, while Tsukumura remained completely unharmed. Tsukumura wondered if Kazumi had finally exhausted the last of her magical power with that shockwave and admitted that she had been far more persistent than expected. Kazumi realized that this was likely the end for her. The rain had finally stopped, and she could no longer move her body. Quietly, she wished she could see Sasuke one last time and tell him the one thing she had always wanted to say. She wanted to apologize. Just as she began to fall once again, Sasuke suddenly arrived. He saw Kazumi lying on the ground and immediately wondered what had happened. Kazumi was shocked to see him there, while Tsukumura questioned why he had come. Sasuke admitted that he had no idea what was happening and asked Tsukumura to explain the situation. Looking around, Sasuke pointed out that, judging by everything he saw, the enemy should have already been defeated. Yet everyone except Tsukumura was lying on the ground. His eyes then fell on the person beneath her, and he realized it was Kazumi. Without hesitation, Tsukumura summoned a sword into her hand and pointed it at him, warning him not to move. She realized that he had no intention of quietly turning back. Kazumi could not understand why Sasuke had come. All she wanted was for him to run away. Tsukumura then decided that this alone would be enough to deal with him. Once again, the lizard demon rose back to its feet, towering over Sasuke. Kazumi stared in disbelief, unable to believe what she was seeing, while Sasuke simply wondered what that monstrous creature was. Kazumi could not accept what had happened. Even Excalibur had failed to destroy the creature completely, yet it had regenerated once again. Tsukumura quietly bid Sasuke farewell as the lizard demon suddenly charged toward him at high speed. Kazumi desperately tried to stand, but her body refused to move. As the lizard demon's jaws closed in on Sasuke, Kazumi desperately wished for him to move. She wanted everything to stop. She prayed that anyone else could be saved instead, as long as Sasuke survived. However, Sasuke remained completely calm. He simply noticed that the monster had come too close, drew back his fist, and threw a single powerful punch. The impact instantly blew the lizard demon apart, causing its entire body to explode. Kazumi could not believe what she had just witnessed. She struggled to understand what had happened before finally realizing that Sasuke had destroyed the lizard demon with nothing but his bare fist. Tsukumura stood frozen in visible shock after witnessing the impossible. At that very moment, Sasuke finally realized that the true enemy standing before him was Miss Tsukumura. Tsukumura declared that Sasuke had completely ruined her plans by taking the divine sword away from those students through the demons. She pointed out that she had even given him a convincing reason to stay far away from this place, yet he had still chosen to stand in her way. She warned Sasuke not to become too confident because no one could stop her anymore. She then revealed the reason for that confidence. She had become an omnipotent wizard. Kazumi watched as an overwhelming amount of magical energy flowed into Miss Tsukimura's body. She wondered if that incredible power was coming from the spirit veins. Spirit veins were the paths through which magical power flowed across the planet. The reason Tsukimura had chosen this location for the mission was because several spirit veins intersected there, allowing her to draw magical power directly from them. This technique was known as spirit vein interference. The monkey demon's mimicry ability and the lizard demon's regenerative ability had both been granted through this technique. She was now capable of using an endless supply of magical energy, transforming herself into a wizard who could continuously use any kind of technique. That level of power was no less than that of a heavenly wizard. She told Sasuke not to take it personally because this would be the end for him. She believed she would not even need a second to crush him with her own hands. The moment she lunged forward and drove her spear toward him, Sasuke caught the spear with one hand. Her eyes widened in surprise that he had stopped it so easily. Before she could react, Sasuke threw a punch that shattered her ribs and sent her rolling across the ground until she crashed into a pile of rocks, scattering stone fragments from the impact. Tsukimura stared in disbelief after seeing the mark that his punch had carved into her armor. She could not understand what had just happened. She immediately forced herself to block out the pain and even questioned when she had been struck. Without wasting another moment, she focused on strengthening the damaged part of her body. Throughout the entire process, Sasuke simply stood there, silently watching and giving her time to recover. Once she had healed herself, she got back to her feet and charged at him again. She attacked relentlessly, but Sasuke calmly blocked every strike with nothing more than his arms. Tsukimura eventually realized that the only chance she had was to attack from his blind spot. Before she could take advantage of that idea, Sasuke delivered a powerful slap across her face. The impact caused her to stagger before she lost her balance and fell backward. Frustrated, she rushed toward him again and unleashed another rapid series of attacks. To her disbelief, Sasuke handled every strike as though he were casually swatting away tiny insects. She thrust her spear at him once more, but Sasuke stopped it again without difficulty. He then forcefully pushed her away and followed it with a powerful palm strike that landed directly on her body, sending Tsukimura flying across the battlefield once again. Lying on the ground, Tsukimura found it impossible to accept that only 2 direct hits had caused such devastating damage. She could not understand the overwhelming power behind Sasuke's attacks. Meanwhile, Sasuke calmly waited and urged her to stand up, making it clear that the fight was not over yet. Tsukimura trembled as she struggled to rise back to her feet. Filled with frustration, she refused to be looked down upon. Kazumi noticed that Tsukimura had activated the lizard demon's regenerative ability once again. Tsukimura insisted that Sasuke would not be able to stop her with attacks of that level alone. She immediately challenged him by unleashing a massive hail of spears that rained down toward him from every direction. Sasuke remained completely unbothered. He shattered every spear with his fists, smashing them apart one after another, while the remaining ones were destroyed by nothing more than his bare hands. After clearing away the entire barrage, he simply looked at Tsukimura and wondered if she was finally finished. Sasuke slowly began walking toward Tsukimura. Then, in the blink of an eye, he moved behind her, grabbed her by the head, and slammed her into the ground, pinning her down with overwhelming force. His anger was directed at the fact that she had laid her hands on Kazumi. Kazumi watched everything unfold, while Tsukimura quickly realized that if things continued like this, she would be defeated. She immediately forced herself back up and leaped away. She could not understand why someone so powerful was living in such a remote rural town. Everything was different from the information she had been given. Deciding that retreat was the best option for now, she tried to escape, but Sasuke was already standing in front of her, preventing her from running. Without giving her any time to react, Sasuke landed a powerful punch to her chin, sending her flying once again. Before she could recover or even prepare herself for the next attack, Sasuke had already appeared behind her once more, gathering tremendous power into his hand. Fortunately for Tsukimura, she activated gravity manipulation, allowing herself to land safely on the ground before that devastating blow could connect. After both of them landed, Tsukimura realized how badly she had misjudged everything. The only reason she had invited this man to cooperate with the mission was to temporarily convince the students that the unusual mission she had prepared was genuine. In reality, most of the students' suspicion and distrust had been directed towards Sasuke. Aside from Vermilion, no one had even noticed the scheme she had been carrying out. To Tsukimura, Sasuke had been nothing more than a convenient cover. On top of that, he was an illegal wizard, so she had believed that she could eliminate him whenever it became necessary. She had dismissed him as an insignificant existence, but she now understood that she had been completely mistaken from the very beginning. As she carefully observed Sasuke, she recognized the overwhelming power he possessed. His natural talent, combined with immeasurable physical strengthening, had elevated him far beyond the level that ordinary people could ever reach. The man standing before her had clearly survived countless battles. He was someone with absolute strength, capable of defeating anyone who stood against him. Sukimura let out a laugh as she admitted that Sasuke was undoubtedly an exceptionally talented mage. She acknowledged that she had truly wanted to avoid using the technique she was about to unleash. Thick black smoke then began pouring out from her body. Sasuke warned that it was damaging her body and that she should stop before it went any further. However, Sukimura had already accepted that consequence and was fully prepared for it. She activated Spirit Vein Interference at its maximum output. In the next moment, a massive golem emerged before them. She pushed herself beyond her limits, forcing an enormous amount of magical energy into her own body, even though doing so risked making her lose her sense of self. Sukimura laughed once again as she admired her overwhelming new form. She believed she now possessed enough power to erase the surrounding mountains in the blink of an eye. She then wondered if Sasuke was still capable of stopping her. Sasuke remained completely calm. In his eyes, stopping her would be easy. Kazumi observed that the golem's entire body was overflowing with an immense amount of mana. She immediately realized that this was Mist Sukimura's final trump card. The golem brought its enormous fist crashing down towards Sasuke, smashing into the ground. Sasuke avoided the attack with ease, stepped back, and then dashed forward. Both of them threw their fists at the same time, and the collision shattered the golem's arm. However, the broken arm regenerated almost instantly. The golem slammed its arm down once again, but Sasuke avoided the attack. As Kazumi watched, she realized that the power it was displaying was on a completely different level from before. On top of that, it still possessed its terrifying regenerative ability. She could hardly believe that such a monster had been created by the power of a single wizard. At the same time, Sasuke realized that if the battle continued like this, there would be no end to it, and Kazumi along with the others would remain in danger. The golem slowly raised one of its arms, which gradually transformed into a deadly weapon. Sasuke immediately understood how dangerous the situation had become. A single swing of that attack would be enough to blow away the entire mountain. The distance between him and the golem was about 30 meters. He glanced toward everyone who was lying unconscious before memories from earlier came back to him. He remembered being told that he should simply support the team from the rear after explaining that his specialty was using mana to strengthen his own body. He had admitted that he was not skilled at magic that required him to release mana outside his body, which was why he could not fight the way Yudo had suggested. He also remembered being told that spells allowing someone to deploy mana outside their body were among the most basic techniques, and he had been questioned about how he could admit that he could not even perform something so fundamental without feeling ashamed. The explanation he had given Mitsuki and the others during the demon subjugation had been partly true and partly false. He did possess some long-range techniques, but they would not have been useful during that battle. He also knew that he was not particularly skilled at using them and still had difficulty controlling them. Because of that, Sasuke realized that using one of those techniques might end up wiping out everything in its path. After reaching that conclusion, he gathered all of his strength and activated the scorching mini-cannon. With his full power, he launched it forward with a mighty punch. The tremendous impact struck the golem directly, overwhelming it. The massive creature struggled to hold itself together before its body slowly dissolved until nothing remained. The force of the mini-cannon spread throughout the entire mountain. When the smoke finally cleared, Sukimura's body was still standing. However, it did not remain that way for long before she eventually collapsed to the ground. Kazumi remained where she was, having witnessed the incredible scene before her eyes. Sasuke then walked over to her. She could hardly believe that he had actually won. He immediately checked to see if she was all right. Sasuke gently placed his hand over her wound. Kazumi immediately realized that the pain had disappeared. She wondered if he was using his body-strengthening technique to protect her body from the pain. To her, it felt almost unbelievable that he had managed to defeat Mist Sukimura using that very technique. She quietly wondered if what she had witnessed was truly real. Sasuke then asked about the others, and Kazumi pointed toward where they were lying. Without hesitation, Sasuke lifted her into his arms and carried her. Kazumi was caught by surprise and wondered why she had suddenly become so flustered. She quietly told herself to calm down because there were so many things she absolutely needed to tell him. She knew that she had to sincerely apologize to him and admit that she had been the one in the wrong. Sasuke looked at Kazumi, making her think that he was upset with her. Instead, he simply noticed that she somehow seemed even lighter than she had been in the past. Kazumi denied it and believed that he had simply become much stronger. She also realized that he had grown much taller. With tears filling her eyes, Kazumi felt genuinely happy that she had been able to meet him again. She quietly thanked him for coming to save her. Sasuke brushed it off, feeling relieved that she was safe. Not long afterward, Sasuke began using his strengthening technique to heal everyone. As he examined them, he realized that none of the others had suffered any serious injuries. Kazumi remembered what Sukimura had told her earlier about not wanting to hurt them unnecessarily. Thinking back on those words, she realized that Miss Sukimura had not been lying about that. After finishing the healing, Suzuki decided that he would leave before the others regained consciousness. Kazumi wanted everyone to at least have the chance to thank him, but Suzuki refused because he no longer wanted to become involved in any of this. Just then, Tia regained consciousness and stopped him before he could leave. Tia thanked him and recognized him as Cabbage Taru. Suzuki insisted that the man by that name was already gone and instead introduced himself as Kinnikuman Soldier, a man with superhuman strength equal to 100 million. However, Tia wondered if he was actually Satasan. She explained that she had briefly seen him fighting after regaining consciousness. The battle had been truly incredible, and she intended to properly express her gratitude for everything he had done. Tia then asked about Miss Tsukimura. Suzuki casually explained that she was lying over there in a strange yoga-like position. Although she looked half dead, he was certain that she was still alive. Tia thanked him once again and became convinced that he truly was a good person. She then looked toward Kazumi for confirmation, and Kazumi agreed that Suzuki was indeed an amazing person. Suzuki admitted that he was completely exhausted and decided it was time to head home. Before leaving, he called out to Kazumi and expressed that he would like to talk with her again if the opportunity ever came. Kazumi became silent for a moment, unsure of how to answer. Suzuki quickly added that it would only happen if she was comfortable with it. Kazumi happily agreed and admitted that she would truly like that as well. Suzuki was pleased by her answer. Then, without warning, dizziness suddenly overwhelmed him. He realized that he had completely forgotten about the backlash from using all of his mana. The same strain had been the reason he had needed to leave work early the previous day, and the muscle pain from then had still not disappeared. Before he could recover, his body finally gave out, and he collapsed to the ground.